I stared at my phone in disbelief, the banking app displaying a balance of $212.47, where just yesterday $675,000 had been. My hands trembled as I read Nathan's message again. Taking some time away with a colleague. Need space to think. Try to contact me. 8 years of marriage reduced to 17 words and an empty bank account. The afternoon light streamed through our Beacon Hill brownstone's tall windows, illuminating the antique desk where I sat. The desk Nathan had always called your little hobby station, with that condescending smile of his. The one he thought was charming. The banking app continued to mock me with its pitiful balance as my mind reeled, trying to process what had happened. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. A notification from my second phone buzzed inside my purse. The phone Nathan didn't know about. Ms. Blackwood, your presence is requested at the quarterly Blackwood Foundation meeting tomorrow. Required documentation has been prepared as per your instructions. Time-sensitive materials await your review. William Porter. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm of decision-making settle over me. In 8 years of marriage, Nathan Bennett had never once asked about my maiden name, never questioned why I insisted on keeping Blackwood for professional reasons, never wondered why I received occasional calls from book club on Thursday afternoons. He was about to find out. What Nathan didn't know, what he never bothered to discover, was that the Blackwood name on the small philanthropic foundation he occasionally heard mentioned at Boston Society events wasn't just coincidentally the same as mine. The Blackwood Foundation, with its $2.3 billion endowment and controlling interest in 7 major East Coast publishing houses, was my family legacy. A legacy I had quietly managed for the past decade while maintaining the appearance of a supportive, unassuming wife. I remember the day we met, 8 years ago. I was inspecting a potential property for the Foundation's literacy program in South Boston. Dressed casually in jeans and a simple sweater, I was taking notes when Nathan approached, all confidence in his tailored suit. "Are you the interior decorator?" he'd asked, his smile suggesting he was doing me a favor by noticing me. I should have corrected him immediately. Instead, I simply replied, "I'm evaluating the space." "For what exactly?" His tone was polite but dismissive, the way people speak to those they assume have no real authority. "For a children's literacy program." His eyes had softened then, his expression warming with what I later recognized as condescension masked as admiration. "That's adorable. My firm is handling the financing for this entire development. Perhaps I could show you around, explain some of the plans? They might affect your decorating choices." I had almost walked away, but something in his assumption, the ease with which he placed me in a box of his creation, piqued my curiosity. How deeply ingrained was this man's habit of underestimating women? Was it specific to me or a broader pattern? The researcher in me, the part that had earned a doctorate in organizational psychology before taking over the foundation, wanted to understand. "That would be lovely," I'd replied, playing along. What followed was 6 months of dating during which Nathan explained my own city to me, lectured me on financial concepts I'd been applying since college, and expressed repeated surprise at my surprisingly intelligent observations about business matters. When he proposed, he suggested I consider scaling back my little foundation work to focus on our future family. I said yes, partly out of a genuine attraction to his ambition and energy, but also because my grandmother Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. "Sometimes, Emily, the most powerful position is the one no one sees you occupying." The prenuptial agreement had been my only insistence. Nathan had been surprised. He had far more visible assets than I appeared to have, but his lawyer assured him it was standard protection for someone of his financial stature. He never questioned why I brought in William Porter, my family's attorney for 3 generations, to handle my side of the negotiations. Never wondered why a foundation assistant would have such distinguished legal representation. The prenup included very specific clauses about financial misconduct and breaches of trust. Clauses Nathan's lawyer had skimmed over, assuring him they were boilerplate and mutually beneficial. As I sat in our brownstone that afternoon, watching the light fade over Boston Common, I opened my laptop and typed in the password to my private email account. Within minutes, I had initiated the protocols William and I had established years ago, just in case. The Blackwood Trust had been dormant during my marriage, its significant resources placed in a holding pattern at my request. I had wanted, perhaps naively, to live as just Emily, not as a Blackwood heir. The activation letter William referenced would change everything. My phone rang. Rachel Chen, my college roommate and now partner at Chen, Goldberg & Associates, one of Boston's premier law firms. "Emily?" William called me. "Is it true?" Her voice was concerned but steady, the voice that had helped me through my parents' death, my grandmother's final days, and the complex transition of the Blackwood holdings into my name. "Nathan emptied our joint account this morning. $675,000. Gone. He's apparently with a colleague." I kept my voice level, factual. Rachel's sharp intake of breath was followed by a stream of creative profanity that momentarily lifted my spirits. "That son of a... I'm coming over. Don't touch anything. Don't call him. And Emily, the trust activation protocols are already in motion. William started them the moment you texted him." An hour later, Rachel sat across from me in my kitchen. Documents spread across the marble island Nathan had insisted on during our renovation last year. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her expression equally severe as she reviewed the banking records. The transfer went to an offshore account in the Caymans, then was immediately split into 3 separate accounts. He planned this. This wasn't impulsive. She looked up, brown eyes sharp with anger on my behalf. "And you're sure about the colleague?" I nodded, sliding my phone across the counter. The screen showed a private Instagram account belonging to Vanessa Collins, a 26-year-old junior financial analyst who had started at Meridian Capital 8 months ago. The most recent post, uploaded an hour earlier, showed a champagne glass against the backdrop of an infinity pool overlooking a beach sunset. The location tag read, "Cabo San Lucas, Paradise Found." Rachel's fingers flew across her tablet. Vanessa Collins, graduated Wharton 2 years ago. Hired at Meridian Capital, directly into Nathan's division. Interesting. What's interesting? Her LinkedIn shows no prior finance experience, no internships in the field. Yet she was hired directly into one of Boston's most competitive financial firms. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Want to guess who wrote her glowing recommendation letter? My stomach twisted. Nathan. Got it in one. Rachel's expression softened, slightly. "Emily, when did you last access the foundation accounts, or the trust?" I felt a flush of guilt. 6 months ago for the foundation? The trust? Not since before we married. Rachel nodded, unsurprised. You wanted to give the marriage a real chance, without the complication of your family's resources. It wasn't a question. She'd been skeptical of my decision from the beginning, but had supported my choice to keep my inheritance separate from my marriage, emotionally and legally. I really thought he might be different, I admitted quietly. That once he knew me, really knew me, the money wouldn't matter. Rachel reached across the island to squeeze my hand. The money always matters to people like Nathan. It's how they keep score. She straightened, professional mode re-engaging. The good news is your prenup is ironclad. The bad news is recovering the stolen funds might be complicated because of how quickly he moved them offshore. I don't care about the money, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. $675,000 is... I trailed off, not wanting to sound callous. A rounding error compared to the trust, Rachel finished. For me. I know, but it's the principle, Emily. He stole from you. That has consequences. My second phone buzzed again. William Porter's name appeared on the screen. Emily, the activation letter is ready for your signature. I've taken the liberty of preparing the additional documentation we discussed years ago. How soon can you come to the office? I'll be there in 30 minutes, I replied, already reaching for my coat. To Rachel, I added, I need to see William. Do you mind staying here? I'd rather not be alone in the house tonight. Rachel nodded, already turning back to her tablet. I'll be here. And Emily, remember what your grandmother used to say? I paused at the door. A Blackwood never gets mad. They get strategic, Rachel finished with a grim smile. The offices of Porter, Whitman & Associates occupied the top floor of a historic building in Boston's financial district. Unlike the gleaming modern towers favored by firms like Meridian Capital, Williams' offices embraced their history, dark wood paneling, leather chairs worn to buttery softness, and walls lined with books that were actually read, not just displayed. For impression. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. William Porter himself was cut from the same cloth as his offices, solid, traditional, and considerably more formidable than his gentle appearance suggested. At 73, his hair was a distinguished silver, his posture military straight. Despite his age, his mind still razor sharp. He greeted me with a formal handshake that transitioned into a fatherly squeeze of my fingers. Emily, I wish we were meeting under different circumstances. As do I, William. I followed him into his private office, where a leather portfolio lay centered on his immaculate desk. The activation letter, he explained, seating himself behind the desk. Once signed, it removes the voluntary restrictions you placed on the Blackwood Trust 8 years ago. Control reverts fully to you, effective immediately. The quarterly foundation meeting tomorrow will be your first official appearance as chairwoman since your hiatus. I felt a weight settle on my shoulders. Not unpleasant, but significant. The responsibility of the Blackwood legacy had been mine since my parents' death when I was 24. But I had deliberately stepped back from active management when I married Nathan, maintaining only minimal oversight while a board of trustees handled day-to-day operations. The foundation has missed your direct guidance, William said quietly. Though Marcus Daniels has been an exemplary interim director, Marcus had been my father's closest friend and my mentor when I first took over the foundation. His agreement to step in during my married sabbatical, as he jokingly called it, had been a relief. Will he be at tomorrow's meeting? I asked, already thinking ahead to the transitions that would need to be managed. Of course. He's been briefed on the situation. Professional details only, William added hastily. Your personal circumstances remain private. Nathan's firm handles investments for several foundation clients, I said, thinking aloud. That connection will need to be severed immediately. William's slight smile held a hint of pride. Already in progress. As per the contingency planning we did before your marriage, all financial relationships with Meridian Capital are being transferred to alternate managers. By the time Mr. Bennett returns from his trip, his firm will have lost approximately $30 million in management accounts. I raised an eyebrow. Only 30? We thought it prudent to be conservative in the initial response, William replied, his tone suggesting this was merely the opening move in a longer game. There are many pieces to position before we play our full hand. I nodded, appreciating, as always, his strategic thinking. And my appearances in the society pages as Mrs. Nathan Bennett? Archived but accessible should they be needed. More importantly, the profile of Emily Blackwood, philanthropist and publishing heiress, has been carefully maintained in select circles during your absence. Your re-emergence will not seem as sudden as Mr. Bennet might hope. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen, my grandfather's, that William had placed beside the letter. The document itself was deceptively simple, just 3 paragraphs releasing me from self-imposed restrictions. But its implications would ripple through Boston's financial and social circles within days. What do you expect Nathan will do when he discovers the truth? I asked, pen poised above the signature line. William considered this, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Based on my observations of Mr. Bennet over the years, I would anticipate he'll initially attempt to leverage the revelation to his advantage. When that fails, he'll likely become vindictive. His type usually does. And Meridian Capital? They will distance themselves from him immediately once they understand the full scope of his actions, both the fund misappropriation and the loss of the Blackwood-connected accounts. Walter Simmons serves on their board and also sits on the Blackwood Foundation board. That connection alone will ensure swift damage control on their part. I signed the letter with a steady hand, then passed it back to William. He added his own signature as witness, then pressed his family seal into the hot wax he'd prepared. Some traditions the Porter firm maintained went beyond legal necessity into the realm of ceremony. I had always appreciated that attention to significant moments. "It's done," he said simply, placing the letter in a folder. "By morning, the necessary parties will be notified. Your accounts and access will be fully restored before the Foundation meeting at 2 p.m. tomorrow." He paused, then added more gently, "Are you certain about attending personally? Marcus could handle the transition announcement if you need more time." I shook my head. "No, I've been hiding long enough, William. It's time for Emily Blackwood to step back into the light." I rose, smoothing down my simple black dress, a far cry from the designer wardrobes that filled my closet at home, purchased to meet Nathan's expectations of a suitable wife. "Please have the driver bring the car around. I'll be staying at the Lake Winnipesaukee house tonight." "Of course. Rachel Chen called while you were en route. She's arranged to have your essential items packed and delivered there." I smiled despite everything. Rachel's efficiency was one of her most endearing qualities. "Thank you, William, for everything." He walked me to the door, his expression softening slightly. "Your grandmother would be proud, Emily. Eleanor always said you had the true Blackwood spine, steel wrapped in silk." The mention of my grandmother brought a fresh wave of emotion. Eleanor Blackwood had been a formidable woman, running the family publishing empire for nearly 40 years after my grandfather's early death. She had been the one to transform a traditional publishing house into a modern media company, and later, establish the foundation that now bore our name. Her guidance had shaped my understanding of power, influence, and responsibility. She also said that revenge is a poor investment unless it pays dividends for more than just your pride, I reminded him. William's smile widened slightly. "Indeed she did, which is why I took the liberty of adding these to your briefing materials." He handed me a slim folder. "Information about Meridian Capital's somewhat questionable investment practices in emerging markets. Nothing explicitly illegal, but certainly ethically dubious. The kind of practices a principled foundation might want to highlight in its next financial responsibility white paper." I accepted the folder, a plan already forming. "The annual financial ethics conference is next month, isn't it?" "Indeed. And this year's theme is transparency in global investments. Your grandmother would call that serendipitous timing." As William's driver navigated the evening traffic toward the highway that would take me to New Hampshire and the Blackwood family's lake house, I opened my personal laptop and began composing a series of emails. The first went to Marcus Daniels, outlining my return and requesting specific reports be prepared for tomorrow's meeting. The second went to the Foundation's Public Relations Director, instructing her to prepare a press release about my resumption of active leadership. The third went to the editor of the Boston Business Journal, accepting a long-standing invitation for an exclusive interview about the future of the Blackwood publishing and philanthropic ventures. I worked steadily as the eye. City lights gave way to suburban developments, and eventually the darkness of rural New Hampshire. By the time we reached the lake house, its windows warmly lit against the night by the staff William had undoubtedly called ahead to alert, I had drafted 7 emails, made arrangements for new legal representation for the foundation. Rachel's eye. Firm would be a significant upgrade from the previous team, and outlined talking points for tomorrow's board meeting. Not once did I draft an email to Nathan. Not once did I call the number he wasn't answering anyway. Instead, I allowed him the illusion of his clean getaway for just a little longer. Let him enjoy the Cabo sun with Vanessa Collins, thinking he had escaped with a small fortune and without consequences. Reality would arrive soon enough, with the force of the Blackwood name behind it. The Blackwood Foundation's quarterly board meeting was held in a discreetly elegant conference room at the top of one of Boston's oldest financial buildings. The room's mahogany table could comfortably seat 20, though today only 12 places were set. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Boston skyline spread out beneath moody April skies threatening rain. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation. The briefcase I carried had belonged to my father, supple leather with my initials now discreetly embossed beside the faded imprint of his. It contained everything I would need for today's meeting, including the dossier William had prepared on Nathan's professional activities. Marcus Daniels was already there, reviewing notes at the head of the table. At 65, Marcus maintained the energetic presence that had made him such an effective partner to my father. His silver hair was cropped close, his dark skin still smooth despite his years, and his eyes sharp behind stylish glasses. Those eyes widened slightly when he saw me in the doorway. Emily. He rose immediately, coming around the table to greet me with a brief professional embrace. Welcome back. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. My gratitude encompassed far more than just the welcome. His steady leadership during my absence, his discretion about my reasons for stepping back, his unfailing loyalty to my family. The prodigal chairwoman returns, he said with a smile that held no judgment, only warmth. You look ready for battle. Not battle, I corrected gently. Reclamation. His expression sobered. William briefed me on the general situation. I'm sorry, Emily. I nodded once, acknowledging his sympathy but unwilling to dwell on it. Where do we stand with the Meridian Capital transitions? Understanding my need to focus on action rather than emotion, Marcus seamlessly shifted to business. 70% complete. The remaining accounts will be transferred by end of day. Walter Simmons has requested a private word with you before the meeting. He's on the Meridian board and is understandably concerned. I'll speak with him briefly. Has there been any reaction yet? Nothing official. Unofficially, there's confusion in certain quarters. Meridian's management is scrambling to understand why several major clients suddenly requested transfers on the same day. I glanced at my watch. They'll have their answer soon enough. The Business Journal interview goes live at noon. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're moving quickly. I've been still for 8 years, I replied. It's time to make up for lost time. Board members began arriving shortly after, each reacting with varying degrees of surprise and pleasure at my presence. Walter Simmons, a distinguished man, in his 60s who had served on multiple corporate boards including Meridian Capital's, approached me with careful neutrality. Ms. Blackwood, he greeted me, reverting immediately to my maiden name. Might I have a word? I led him to a small side office, closing the door to give us privacy. I received a very unusual call this morning, he began without preamble. From Meridian's CEO, asking if I knew why the Blackwood Foundation and related entities were suddenly withdrawing all managed funds. And what did you tell him? I asked, my tone pleasant, but offering nothing. That I was as surprised as he, was and would inquire at today's meeting. He studied me carefully. I assume this has something to do with your husband's situation? I appreciated his delicacy. Mr. Bennett's actions have necessitated a complete reevaluation of all relationships, personal and professional. Walter nodded slowly. I see. I should inform you that there are rumors of irregularities in some of Meridian's emerging market practices. Nothing proven, but yes, I've received some preliminary information about those concerns. I met his gaze directly. The Foundation takes its ethical investment obligations very seriously. As do I, Ms. Blackwood. As do I. He hesitated, then added, if you're planning what I think you're planning, you should know that many on Meridian's board would welcome a restructuring of certain departments, including Mr. Bennett's division. I understood the message beneath his careful phrasing. Walter was offering alliance, suggesting that Meridian's board might sacrifice Nathan to preserve their relationship with the Blackwood interests. The Foundation's upcoming white paper on ethical investment practices will focus on transparency and accountability, I replied. We won't be naming specific firms, but our case studies will be thoroughly researched and detailed. Relief flickered across his face. I've always admired the Foundation's commitment to raising industry standards. We believe in appropriate consequences, Mr. Simmons, not scorched earth. He nodded, message received. Then I look forward to today's meeting, Ms. Blackwood. And may I say, it's good to have you back at the helm. As Walter left to join the others gathering in the main conference room, I checked my phone one last time. The Boston Business Journal had just published their exclusive Blackwood Heir Returns to Active Leadership of Foundation and Publishing Empire. The accompanying photo taken this morning showed me on the steps of the Foundation building, looking confident and purposeful. I sent a single text to Rachel. It's begun. Her reply came immediately. His flight lands at 6 p.m. Everything is in place. Taking a deep breath, I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked into the boardroom with the calm purpose that had always been my greatest inheritance from the Blackwood line. The meeting proceeded with efficient precision. I opened with a brief statement about my return to active leadership, thanking Marcus for his exemplary service during my absence. The board members, many of whom had served since my father's time, responded with approving nods and welcome-back smiles. We moved through the agenda methodically. Financial reports, grant approvals, publishing division updates. When we reached the item marked Investment Strategy Review, I nodded to Marcus, who distributed folders to each board member. As you'll see, I began, we're implementing significant changes to our investment management relationships. Effective immediately, all Foundation and related Blackwood family assets previously managed by Meridian Capital are being transferred to alternate firms. Walter Simmons, playing his part perfectly, frowned in practiced concern. May I ask, the reason for this sudden change? Meridian has managed these accounts for over 5 years. Recent information has come to light regarding potential ethical concerns with some of Meridian's emerging market practices, I replied smoothly. Additionally, there have been personnel issues that call into question their alignment with the Foundation's values. Understanding flickered across several faces. Boston's financial community was tightly knit. Rumors about Nathan and Vanessa had likely already begun circulating. The Foundation cannot risk association with firms whose practices, or key personnel, fail to meet our ethical standards, I continued. The transfers should be complete by end of day. Our new relationships will be with firms that have demonstrated consistent commitment to transparency and ethical practices. I fully support this decision, Walter offered, providing the board cover to fall in line. The Foundation's reputation is paramount. The remainder of the meeting passed without incident. As we concluded, several board members approached to welcome me back more personally, offering subtle expressions of support. Their loyalty to the Blackwood name, and by extension to me, was evident and reassuring. Marcus caught my eye as the room emptied, gesturing toward his tablet. "You might want to see this," he said quietly. The screen showed a financial news. Alert. Meridian Capital stocks dip 4% on news of major client departures. "Just the beginning," I murmured. Marcus's expression was both admiring and concerned. "You've declared war without firing a single direct shot. Impressive, but... Your husband won't take this lying down once he realizes what's happening." I smiled faintly. "I'm counting on it." As the boardroom cleared, I remained seated, allowing myself one moment of quiet reflection before the next phase began. The Blackwood Foundation had been my parents' pride. Their legacy expanded from the publishing empire my great-grandfather had built. They had raised me to understand that with great resources came great responsibility, not just to manage those resources wisely, but to use them to improve the world around us. For 8 years, I had stepped back from active leadership, convincing myself it was to give my marriage space to grow without the shadow of the Blackwood fortune. In truth, I had been hiding from the responsibility, from the power, from the person I was meant to be. Nathan's betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me out of hiding. For that, at least, I would eventually be grateful to him. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "His flight just landed early. ETA to River Oaks residence approximately 45 minutes. I glanced at my watch. It was time. The stage was set for the final act of this particular drama. Nathan Bennett was about to discover exactly who he had married and what he had lost. The Blackwood Lake House had always been my sanctuary. As a child, I'd spent summers exploring its shores and forests, finding solace in nature when the pressures of being a Blackwood heir became overwhelming. Now, as I stood on the private dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold, I felt that same sense of clarity returning. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The Business Journal article was generating exactly the ripples William and I had anticipated. Already, 3 other financial publications had picked up the story, and social media was buzzing with speculation about my sudden return to public life after years of quiet marriage to finance executive Nathan Bennett. I ignored most of the messages, responding only to Rachel's updates about Nathan's return. He had landed at Boston Logan International Airport at 5:48 p.m., passed through customs without incident, and was currently in a taxi headed toward our Beacon Hill home, a home he would find inaccessible, the security codes changed, the locks replaced, and his belongings packed in neat boxes in the garage. The confrontation I had carefully orchestrated would begin the moment he discovered he couldn't enter what he still thought of as his house. I anticipated rage, confusion, and then the desperate scramble of a man watching his carefully constructed life crumble beneath him. I wasn't there to witness it. I had no desire to see Nathan's face when he realized what was happening. This wasn't about emotional satisfaction for me. It was about justice, consequences, and reclaiming my own power. William's call came at precisely 7:15 p.m. "He's contacted my office," William reported, his tone professional but with a hint of satisfaction. "Quite agitated, demanding to know why he can't access the house and threatening legal action for the illegal lockout of his property." "And your response?" As instructed, I informed him that the property in question is owned by the Blackwood Family Trust, not jointly by the marital partnership, and that his access has been terminated due to documented financial misconduct, as per Section 23B of the prenuptial agreement. I also advised him that a formal notice of divorce proceedings has been filed with the Suffolk County Court. I nodded, though William couldn't see me. His reaction? Initially, disbelief, then significant anger. He seemed particularly fixated on the Blackwood Trust aspect, repeating several times that there is no trust and that you are just a foundation assistant. I took the liberty of directing him to today's Business Journal article. I could almost see Nathan's face as he pulled up the article on his phone. the slow dawning of comprehension as he read about Emily Blackwood, heir to the publishing fortune and chairwoman of the foundation, returning to active leadership after a sabbatical. The shock when he saw my picture and recognized his wife in the confident woman described as controlling assets worth billions. Has he made the connection yet between his actions and the consequences? William's pause told me everything. He seemed more focused on the revelation of your status than on understanding his own culpability. He demanded to know why you lied to him about who you were. I felt a familiar twinge of disappointment. Even now, faced with the consequences of his own betrayal, Nathan was casting himself as the victim. His access to Meridian Capital terminated as of 6:30 p.m. His company email triggered an automatic response directing all business inquiries to Walter Stevens, and his building access was deactivated. The official reason given was pending investigation into ethical violations. And the joint accounts? The offshore transfers have been flagged and frozen by our banking contacts. The process of recovering the funds has begun, though it may take several weeks to complete. In the meantime, his personal credit cards have been canceled, and his accounts restricted to ATM withdrawals of no more than $300 daily. I took a deep breath, feeling neither triumph nor sorrow, just a calm certainty that this was necessary. Has he attempted to contact me directly? 17 missed calls in the past 40 minutes, and 32 text messages. William's tone held a hint of grim amusement. Would you like me to summarize the content? No need. I can imagine their progression from confusion to anger to desperate bargaining. I watched a loon dive beneath the lake's now darkening surface. Has he mentioned Vanessa Collins? Not to me. However, our sources indicate she returned to the hotel room in Cabo to find her access card deactivated and her belongings moved to a standard room rather than the suite. The hotel manager informed her that the premium reservation had been canceled due to payment issues. I hadn't directly orchestrated that particular humiliation, but I wasn't surprised that the financial dominoes were already falling. Nathan's corporate cards would have been the first thing Meridian canceled once they understood the situation. Where is he now? According to the security detail, he's currently at the Liberty Hotel bar, alone. The Liberty, a luxury hotel, converted from a former prison, seemed appropriately symbolic. Nathan would be drowning his confusion in overpriced bourbon, desperately trying to make sense of how his world had collapsed so completely in less than 24 hours. Keep me updated, if anything changes. Otherwise, I'll proceed as planned tomorrow. After ending the call with William, I walked back to the main house. The Blackwood Lake property sprawled across 12 acres of prime New Hampshire waterfront. The main house, a modern interpretation of traditional New England architecture. All clean lines and massive windows framing spectacular views, but with warmth that prevented it from feeling cold or sterile. Rachel had arrived while I was on the dock, and I found her in the kitchen unpacking what appeared to be enough Thai food to feed a small army. Stress eating for both of us, she explained unapologetically, arranging containers across the massive island. Besides, launching a counteroffensive against your scumbag husband works up an appetite. I smiled despite myself, grateful for her presence. Any updates from your end? Rachel nodded, pulling out her tablet. Meridian Capital is in full damage control mode. They've issued a statement temporarily relieving Nathan Bennett of his duties pending an internal review. Translation: they're looking for a way to fire him without admitting they had no idea one of their senior managers was engaged in ethics violations. And the mistress? Vanessa Collins is having a very bad day in paradise, Rachel replied, with undisguised satisfaction. Not only was she downgraded from luxury suite to standard room, but she's now stranded in Cabo with limited funds. Her corporate cards were also canceled, and it seems Nathan had convinced her to put her personal savings into one of those offshore accounts, which is now frozen. I frowned slightly. She's young and foolish, but I have no desire to destroy her completely. Already handled, Rachel said, serving herself a generous portion of pad thai. I had William arrange for a one-way economy ticket back to Boston, charged to the foundation as a personnel welfare expense. It gets her home, but without the first-class treatment she's apparently become accustomed to. I accepted the plate. Rachel handed me, realizing I hadn't eaten properly all day. Nathan will try to contact me again. Of course he will. Men like him always think they can talk their way out of anything. Rachel's expression darkened. He stole your money, Emily. He planned to abandon you while living it up with his mistress on your dime. Don't let him manipulate you now. I won't, I promised, both to Rachel and myself. But I will confront him, on my terms. Rachel studied me carefully. You still have feelings for him. It wasn't a question, and I didn't treat it as one. Instead, I considered what I actually felt for the man I had married 8 years ago. There was anger, certainly. Disappointment. A profound sense of betrayal. But beneath all that was something else, a complex grief for the relationship I had believed in, perhaps foolishly, despite the evidence of Nathan's character that had been there from the beginning. I invested 8 years in our marriage, I said finally. That doesn't disappear overnight, even with what he's done. But whatever feelings remain don't change what needs to happen now. Rachel nodded, accepting this. What's your next move? I took a bite of food, savoring the spicy comfort before answering. Tomorrow morning I meet with the publishing division executives. By afternoon, I want a complete audit of all Blackwood holdings and investments. And in the evening. I paused, steeling my resolve. In the evening, I'm having dinner at the Capitol Grill, Nathan's favorite restaurant, a table he can't afford anymore. You want him to see you. I want him to understand exactly what he threw away. After dinner, Rachel retreated to one of the guest suites, leaving me alone in the great room with its soaring ceilings and wall of windows overlooking the moonlit lake. I curled into the window seat, a glass of wine in hand, and finally allowed myself to look at Nathan's desperate text messages. They told the story of his unraveling, each message more frantic than the last. At 4 p.m., Emily, call me. There's some kind of mistake with the house security. 8:12 p.m., why aren't you answering? Where are you? 8:17 p.m., I just spoke to some lawyer named Porter. What the hell is going on? 8:25 p.m., Blackwood Trust? What is he talking about? Call me now. 8:31 p.m., my cards aren't working. None of them. What have you done? 8:40 p.m., I just saw the Business Journal article. Is this some kind of joke? You're Emily Blackwood? The Blackwood? 8:43 p.m., this is insane. Call me. We need to talk. 8:52 p.m., my building access is revoked. My email isn't working. Emily, whatever you think I did, this is extreme. 9:04 p.m., okay, I admit taking the money was wrong, but I was going to pay it back. This reaction is completely disproportionate. 9:16 p.m., you've been lying to me for 8 years and you're punishing me? This is unbelievable. 9:23 p.m., your family's lawyers just got my accounts frozen. You can't do that. I'll fight this. 9:37 p.m., Emily, please, I made a mistake. We can work this out. Just talk to me. 9:52 p.m., is this because of Vanessa? It didn't mean anything. Just a fling. I was coming back. 10:14 p.m., do you know what this is doing to my reputation? My career? You're destroying everything I've built. 10:28 p.m., I didn't even know you had this kind of money or power. How was I supposed to know? 10:45 p.m., I'm at the Liberty. Room 342. Please come talk to me. I'm begging you. The last message had arrived just minutes ago. I put the phone down, noting with detached interest the rapid cycle from confusion to anger to bargaining to self-pity. Not once had Nathan acknowledged the fundamental betrayal of emptying our joint account. Not once had he recognized that his plan to abandon me with nothing was what had triggered these consequences. Instead, he'd fixated on my deception, the fact that I hadn't corrected his assumptions about who I was. This, more than anything, confirmed that I was making the right decision. Nathan hadn't changed. He had simply been revealed. My phone buzzed with a new message. Expecting another plea from Nathan, I was surprised to see Marcus Daniels' name instead. Just received word that Boston Magazine wants to feature you in their Power Players issue next month. Timing is perfect for the Foundation's new initiatives. Also, Nathan Bennett just called the Foundation office asking for your direct line. Didn't give it to him, of course. I smiled slightly at Marcus's characteristic blend of business and personal support. He had been one of the few people who knew the full truth about my marriage from the beginning, having expressed concern when I first announced my intention to step back from active leadership. "He doesn't see you, Emily," he had warned gently. "He sees the version of you that fits his worldview." Marcus had been right, of course, though it had taken me 8 years and a devastating betrayal to fully accept it. I replied with thanks for the information and a confirmation that I'd handle the magazine feature personally. Then, placing my phone on Do Not Disturb mode, I turned my attention to the briefing materials William had prepared for tomorrow's meetings. If I was reclaiming my place at the head of the Blackwood Enterprises, I needed to be fully prepared, not just for the confrontation with Nathan, but for the responsibilities I was embracing once more. The publishing division meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the historic Blackwood Publishing headquarters in Cambridge. The building, a converted textile mill with exposed brick walls and massive timber beams, housed the executive offices of what had grown from a single prestigious literary imprint into a diverse media company with 7 distinct publishing houses under its umbrella. I arrived early, dressed in a navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation. The executive assistant outside the boardroom did a double take when she saw me, clearly having heard rumors of my return, but unprepared for my actual presence. "Ms. Blackwood, we weren't expecting, that is, the meeting isn't scheduled until—" "I'm early, Diane," I said, recalling her name from briefing materials. "I wanted to reacquaint myself with the space before everyone arrives." "Of course." She recovered quickly, professional training kicking in. "Can I get you anything? Coffee?" "Black, thank you." I entered the boardroom, deliberately choosing not the chair at the head of the table where visiting executives usually sat, but the chair at the foot, the position Marcus had occupied as acting head of the division during my absence. The boardroom walls displayed framed first edition covers from Blackwood Publishing's most iconic books. My great-grandfather's first acquisition, a now classic American novel. The controversial memoir my grandfather had defended against obscenity. Charges in the 1960s. The international bestseller my father had personally edited that later became an award-winning film. The Blackwood legacy in physical form, surrounding me as I prepared to fully embrace it once more. Executives began arriving shortly after. Like Diane, each registered surprise at finding me already seated in the boardroom, followed by varying degrees of uncertainty about how to interact with the prodigal owner. Some knew me from my earlier active involvement with the company. Others had been hired during my absence and knew me only by reputation. Marcus arrived last, precisely on time, and handled the introductions with practiced ease. "For those who haven't had the pleasure," he said, "Emily Blackwood is not just the owner of Blackwood Publishing and chairwoman of the Foundation, but also a brilliant strategic thinker who holds a doctorate in organizational psychology from Harvard. During her sabbatical, she has remained informed about major decisions while allowing the executive team operational autonomy. That arrangement is now evolving." I noted the careful phrasing, sabbatical rather than absence, evolving rather than ending. Marcus was creating a narrative that preserved both my authority and the executive's dignity. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, standing to address the room. I appreciate your leadership during my step back from day-to-day operations. That leadership will continue to be vital as we move forward together. Relief flickered across several faces. No one was being replaced or demoted, at least not immediately. Blackwood Publishing has maintained its position as an industry leader in terms of prestige, I continued, but our market share in digital content and emerging formats has not kept pace with our competitors. Today, I want to discuss a strategic realignment that addresses those gaps while preserving our core identity. For the next 2 hours, I led a discussion about the publishing division's future. I had done my homework, reviewing financial reports, market analyses, and competitive assessments. I knew which imprints were underperforming, which executives were innovative versus those clinging to outdated models, and which emerging opportunities had been overlooked. The discussion was robust, occasionally heated, but productive. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined an ambitious growth strategy, identified key acquisition targets, and established working groups to develop implementation plans. I had also quietly assessed which executives would thrive in the new direction and which might need to be transitioned out. As the meeting concluded, I pulled Marcus aside. "Walk with me?" We exited through a private door that led to a small courtyard garden, a peaceful oasis in the midst of Cambridge's academic bustle. "You handled that masterfully," Marcus said once we were alone. They expected a figurehead making a brief appearance. "You gave them a leader with a vision." "I've been absent too long," I admitted. "There's so much potential being squandered." "Not squandered," Marcus corrected gently. "Perhaps not maximized. But the foundation you built has remained solid." I smiled at the metaphor. "Speaking of foundations, I need to review the full portfolio before this afternoon's finance meeting. 8 years is too long to rely on quarterly summaries." Marcus's expression grew more serious. "Emily, there's something else you should know. Nathan Bennett called me directly this morning." I stiffened. "What did he want?" "To explain his side of the story. He seems to think I might act as an intermediary between you two." Marcus shook his head slightly. "He also implied that your actions are disproportionate and possibly driven by emotional instability." A familiar anger flickered through me. How typical of Nathan to attempt to undermine my credibility rather than face his own actions. "What did you tell him?" "That the Blackwood Foundation does not involve itself in the personal matters of its leadership, but that as a longtime family friend, I have complete confidence in your judgment and stability." Marcus's tone hardened slightly. I also reminded him that attempting to create discord among Foundation leadership could be construed as interference with business operations, which would violate several clauses of his now-defunct employment contract with Meridian. I felt a rush of gratitude for Marcus's loyalty. "Thank you." "He's desperate," Marcus observed. "And a desperate man with a bruised ego can be dangerous, Emily." "I'm aware. William has engaged additional security, and Rachel is handling the legal containment strategy." I checked my watch. "I need to get to the financial review. We'll talk more at tomorrow's Foundation meeting?" Marcus nodded, concern still evident in his eyes. "Just be careful. Men like Nathan Bennett don't accept defeat easily, especially at the hands of a woman they've underestimated." The financial review meeting at First Atlantic Trust was essentially a formality, a necessary reintroduction of myself to the team that had managed the Blackwood family's substantial investment portfolio during my sabbatical. The bankers and financial advisors were predictably deferential, walking me through performance reports and strategic positions with the careful respect reserved for clients whose assets exceeded the billion-dollar threshold. I asked pointed questions about specific investments, challenged assumptions about market trends, and made it clear that while I trusted their expertise, I would be taking a much more active role in financial decisions moving forward. By the end of the 3-hour session, I had approved 2 major reallocations, questioned a third, and requested detailed analysis of emerging market opportunities that had been mentioned only in passing. Ms. Blackwood has always had a remarkably intuitive grasp of market dynamics, the chief investment officer remarked to his team as the meeting concluded. The comment was meant as a compliment, but I noted the subtle sexism in attributing my financial acumen to intuition rather than education and expertise. Not intuition, Mr. Harrington, I corrected gently. Analysis. My doctoral research at Harvard focused on decision-making patterns in financial markets during periods of disruption. I find those patterns remain remarkably consistent across time and technology changes. His expression registered, surprise followed by recalibration, the classic response of men discovering that the wealthy female client they had mentally categorized was, in fact, their intellectual equal or superior. As I left First Atlantic's imposing granite building, Rachel called with an update. "Nathan's getting more desperate," she reported without preamble. "He's contacted 3 different law firms trying to find representation for a challenge to the prenup. So far, no takers. Boston's legal community knows better than to go up against the Blackwood family on contract law," I observed, sliding into the back seat of the waiting town car. "William had Archie Whitman draft that prenup, and Archie hasn't lost a contract dispute in 40 years. True, but Nathan doesn't know that. He thinks he married a foundation assistant, remember? He's still processing who you actually are." I gazed out the window as we navigated Boston's narrow streets toward my next appointment. Has he made any progress recovering funds or accessing accounts? None. The offshore accounts remain frozen, pending investigation, and Meridian Capital has placed him on administrative leave while they conduct an internal review. His corporate apartment access has been revoked as well. This last bit was new information. Where is he staying? Still at the Liberty Hotel. Apparently, he's run up quite a bar tab. Rachel's tone carried a hint of vindictive satisfaction. He's also been calling everyone in his professional network trying to line up interviews, but word has spread about the circumstances of his departure from Meridian. I felt a twinge of something close to pity. Nathan's entire identity was built around his professional status and financial success. Stripped of those external validations, what remained? Did I even know the real Nathan Bennett beneath the ambitious financial executive I had married? "The dinner reservation at Capitol Grill is confirmed for 8 p.m., Rachel continued. "Private dining room as requested. And William's team reports that Nathan has his own reservation there for 7:30, apparently using one of the few credit cards that hasn't been canceled yet, a personal card with a modest limit." The coincidence seemed too perfect. He chose Capitol Grill on his own? According to William's sources, he's meeting Walter Simmons there, presumably trying to salvage his relationship with Meridian's board. So Nathan was attempting damage control, reaching out to the one board member he likely saw as potentially sympathetic. He didn't know that Walter had already aligned himself with the Blackwood interests, viewing Nathan as expendable collateral. Damage. "Perfect," I said, making a decision. "Have William contact Walter. The meeting should proceed as planned, but Walter should leave by 8:15. And change my reservation. Not the private dining room. I want a table in the main restaurant. Visible." Rachel was silent for a moment, processing the implications of this change. "You want Nathan to see you, to know you're there while his world crumbles. I want him to understand that while he's scrambling to salvage what he can from the wreckage of his choices, I'm moving forward, reclaiming what was always mine. It's risky. He could make a scene. He won't. Of this I was certain. Nathan prizes public perception too highly. He'll maintain composure in that setting, no matter how desperate he feels. And afterwards? Afterwards, I'll speak with him privately. On my terms, not his." As the car pulled up to my next appointment, a meeting with the editor of Boston magazine about the upcoming feature, I felt a familiar sense of calm settle over me. the kind of calm that had allowed me to build the foundation's international presence in my 20s, to navigate the complex merger of two publishing rivals in my early 30s, and now to reclaim my identity and power after years of deliberate submission. Nathan had emptied our account believing he was leaving me with nothing. Tonight, he would discover the full magnitude of what he had actually lost. The Capitol Grill occupied the ground floor of a historic building in Boston's financial district, its dark wood paneling and subdued lighting creating an atmosphere of moneyed exclusivity. Nathan and I had dined there often during our marriage, always at his insistence. He had enjoyed the restaurant's association with financial success, the way the staff recognized him as a regular, the performance of belonging among Boston's elite. I arrived precisely at 8:00 p.m., dressed in a deep burgundy sheath dress that I knew accentuated my figure without appearing overtly seductive. My hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, and I wore the diamond earrings that had been my grandmother Eleanor's, understated but undeniably valuable to the discerning eye. The maitre d' recognized me immediately, though I had rarely used my Blackwood name when dining there with Nathan. "Ms. Blackwood, welcome back. Your table is ready, as requested. Central dining room with a view of the main floor." I followed him through the restaurant, aware of heads turning as we passed. The Business Journal article had included my photograph, and Boston's financial and social elites were quick to connect the name with the face. Whispers followed in my wake. Speculation about my return to public life, curiosity about the sudden changes at Meridian Capital, perhaps even gossip about Nathan's conspicuous absence from my side. My table offered a perfect view of where Nathan sat with Walter Simmons, their conversation appearing tense even from a distance. Nathan's back was to me, but Walter's face was visible, his expression carefully neutral as he listened to whatever increasingly desperate pitch Nathan was making. I accepted the wine list from the server, ordered a glass of Cabernet that cost more than Nathan's remaining daily ATM withdrawal limit, and settled in to wait. Within minutes, Walter noticed my presence, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. To his credit, his expression revealed nothing to Nathan, who continued talking with the intensity of a man fighting for his professional life. At precisely 8:15, Walter checked his watch, made his apologies, and stood to leave. As he turned, his eyes met mine briefly across the restaurant. The slight nod he gave me confirmed that everything was proceeding according to plan. I watched, as Nathan remained at the table, shoulders slumped in momentary defeat before he straightened, reaching for his water glass with forced composure. It was only a matter of time before he turned and saw me. The moment came 3 minutes later. Nathan glanced around, perhaps looking for the server, and froze when his gaze landed on me. Even from across the restaurant, I could see the blood drain from his face, followed by a flush of color that rose from his collar to his hairline. Shock, recognition, humiliation, and anger chased across his features in rapid succession. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. 8 years of marriage distilled into a single charged glance across a crowded restaurant. Then, with deliberate calm, I raised my wine glass in a mock toast before turning my attention to the menu the server had placed before me. From the corner of my eye, I watched Nathan struggle with his response. Stand and confront me? Leave in humiliated retreat? Pretend he hadn't seen me? His indecision was evident in the aborted movements, half rising, then sitting again, reaching for his phone, then putting it down untouched. Eventually, he did what men like Nathan always do when cornered. He attempted to regain control of the narrative. Summoning the server, he ordered what I knew would be the most expensive scotch on the menu, then sat back with a forced appearance of relaxed confidence, occasionally glancing my way with what he clearly hoped appeared to be casual interest, rather than desperate apprehension. I proceeded with my dinner, a leisurely affair of perfectly prepared filet mignon, seasonal vegetables, and a second glass of excellent Cabernet. Throughout the meal, I engaged in pleasant conversation with the server, accepted greetings from 2 foundation donors who stopped by my table, and generally conveyed the impression of a woman enjoying a sophisticated dinner alone, unbothered by her husband's presence or the public nature of our estrangement. Nathan, meanwhile, nursed his scotch with increasing tension. He checked his phone obsessively, adjusted his tie repeatedly, and glanced my way with growing frequency. The scotch was followed by another, his movements becoming slightly less coordinated, his public mask of composure beginning to slip. I timed my departure perfectly, finishing my coffee and requesting the check just as Nathan signaled for a third drink. As I rose to leave, I made direct eye contact with him, then deliberately walked to his table. "Nathan," I said, my voice pitched, to carry no further than his ears despite the public setting. "I believe we have matters to discuss. I'll be in the bar at the Liberty Hotel in 1 hour. If you wish to speak with me, that will be your opportunity." Before he could respond, I turned and walked away, feeling his eyes boring into my back as I exited the restaurant with unhurried confidence. The confrontation I had been orchestrating since discovering the emptied account was about to reach its conclusion, but it would happen on my terms, not his. As my driver navigated the evening traffic toward the Liberty, I texted Rachel a brief update. She responded immediately, concern evident even in her written words. "Are you sure about this? Meeting him alone?" "Not alone," I replied. "The Liberty Bar is public. William's security team will be present but discreet. And Nathan needs this conversation as much as I do. Closure, if nothing else." What I didn't say, what I barely admitted to myself, was that I needed to understand, not just why Nathan had betrayed me, but why I had allowed myself to remain in a relationship where I was fundamentally unseen and unvalued. The answers to those questions would shape not just the aftermath of this marriage, but the path I chose moving forward. The Liberty Hotel's bar, ironically named Alibi, occupied what had once been the jail's drunk tank when the building served as the Charles Street prison. Now, it was one of Boston's most stylish cocktail lounges, its history transformed into an edgy backdrop for the city's elite to sip overpriced drinks beneath exposed brick and original prison bars. I arrived before Nathan, securing a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. The security team William had arranged were skillfully distributed throughout the space. A woman at the bar engrossed in her phone, a couple conversing quietly near the door, a solo businessman working on a laptop across the room, present but unobtrusive, ready to intervene only if absolutely necessary. Nathan appeared 15 minutes later, slightly unsteady from the scotch but struggling to maintain his composure. He spotted me immediately, making his way through the crowded bar with forced confidence that didn't quite mask his apprehension. He looked thinner than I remembered, shadows beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights that predated the current crisis. "Emily," he said as he reached my table, my name emerging somewhere between a greeting and an accusation. "Nathan, please sit." He hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair across from me. Up close, the strain of the past 48 hours was evident in the rumpled quality of his usually immaculate shirt, the slight tremor in his hands as he placed them flat on the table. "I suppose you're enjoying this," he began, bitterness edging his words. The great Emily Blackwood, revealing her true identity and watching me squirm. "Is that really what you think this is about?" I kept my voice level, genuinely curious about his perception of what was happening. "What else? You've spent 8 years pretending to be someone you're not, and now you're using your family's money and influence to destroy me because of one mistake." "One mistake," I repeated, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "You emptied our joint account of nearly $700,000, Nathan. You were leaving the country with your mistress. By your own admission in those text messages to Vanessa, you weren't planning to come back until things settled down. That's not a mistake. It's a deliberate betrayal." He had the grace to flush, but his defensive posture didn't waver. I was confused, unhappy. You were always so contained, so perfect. I never felt like I really knew you. You never tried to know me, I countered quietly. From the day we met, you decided who I was and what I was capable of. You put me in a box of your creation, and when I didn't correct your assumptions, you took that as confirmation that your assessment was correct. Not once in 8 years did you ask about my work with genuine interest. Not once did you consider that I might be more than the supportive wife you wanted. Because you lied about who you were. His voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables before he controlled himself. You're the heir to one of Boston's largest fortunes, for God's sake. You let me believe we were building something together when you already had everything. The bitter emphasis on the final word revealed more than Nathan probably intended. The core of his resentment wasn't my deception, but my independent wealth and success. The fact that I had never needed him the way he needed to be needed. I never lied to you, Nathan. I simply allowed you to draw your own conclusions. I leaned forward slightly. And now I'm allowing you to experience the consequences of your choices. The money you took, the trust you violated, the vows you broke, those were your decisions, not mine. He stared at me, comprehension finally beginning to dawn in his eyes. This isn't just about punishing me, is it? It's about taking back control, reclaiming your power. It's about justice, I corrected. Proportional consequences for deliberate actions. You chose to betray our marriage in the most fundamental way. Now you're facing the results of that choice. Nathan's expression hardened, the vulnerability of moments earlier disappearing behind the mask of the confident financial executive I had married. And what exactly are those results going to be, Emily? You've frozen my accounts, gotten me suspended from my job, locked me out of our home. What's the end game here? Financial ruin? Professional exile? Public humiliation? I studied him, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the man beneath the charming facade. Ambitious, certainly, but also deeply insecure, his self-worth. Intrinsically tied to external markers of success that could be quantified and displayed. The endgame, as you put it, is closure, I said finally. The divorce will proceed according to the terms of the prenuptial agreement. The financial consequences of your actions are outlined clearly in that document, which you signed willingly. As for your professional future, that depends largely on Meridian Capital's internal investigation and your own ability to rebuild your reputation. You've made that impossible. Real fear flashed in his eyes now. No one will hire me after this. You've destroyed my career over an affair and some money that I would have paid back eventually. I've done nothing but reveal the truth, Nathan. If the truth destroys your career, perhaps you should examine the choices that made you vulnerable to such exposure. He stared at me, incredulity warring with dawning comprehension. You really believe that, don't you? That this is just? That your actions have natural consequences? I finished for him, watching recognition finally dawn in his eyes. Yes, Nathan. I do believe that. He slumped back in his chair, the facade of the confident financial executive finally crumbling completely. I never knew you, he murmured, more to himself than to me. 8 years, and I never really knew you at all. You never wanted to know me, I corrected gently. You wanted the version of me that you created, supportive, decorative, unchallenging. When I gave you that version, you took it as confirmation that your assessment was correct, not as a choice I was making. Nathan stared at his hands, now clasped tightly on the table. Why did you do it? Why pretend to be less than you are for all those years? It was the first genuine question he had asked, the first time he seemed interested in understanding, rather than defending himself or attacking me. I considered my answer carefully. At first it was curiosity, I admitted. I wanted to see if you would look beyond your initial assumptions, Later, it became a comfortable, in a way. Being Emily Bennett instead of Emily Blackwood meant being valued, or not, for myself, not my family name or resources. And now? What happens now? Now I reclaim who I truly am. The divorce proceeds, you rebuild. Your life without access to my resources, and we both move forward. He looked up sharply. That's it? After 8 years of marriage, you're just done? You were done the moment you transferred that money and boarded a plane with Vanessa Collins, I reminded him. I'm simply acknowledging the reality. You created. Nathan's expression hardened again, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. You'll regret this, Emily. The prenup may protect your precious fortune, but there are other ways to fight back. The press would love to hear about the deceptive Blackwood heiress who hid her identity from her own husband. I had anticipated this threat. It was so characteristically Nathan to resort to intimidation when persuasion failed. Go ahead, I said calmly. Tell them whatever version of events makes you feel better. But consider this. In your story, you're either a gold digger who stole money and ran off with his mistress when he discovered his wife had wealth, or you're an incompetent financial professional who never bothered to research his own wife's background before marriage. Neither narrative serves your reputation. The blood drained from his face as he realized the trap he had set for himself. In any version of events he might share publicly, his own actions remained indefensible. You've thought of everything, haven't you? His tone was resigned now, the fight draining away. Not everything, I admitted. I never thought you would betray me so completely. That was the one possibility I failed to prepare for adequately. For a moment, genuine remorse flickered across his features. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Vanessa was a distraction. The money was just insurance, in case things went badly. Things have gone badly, Nathan, just not in the way you anticipated. I gathered my purse, signaling that our conversation was drawing to a close. The divorce papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. They're straightforward given the prenuptial provisions. William Porter will handle any questions your lawyer might have. And if I don't sign? Then we proceed to court, where the evidence of your financial misconduct and infidelity becomes public record. I'm offering you a dignified exit, Nathan. I suggest you take it. He nodded slowly, defeat evident in every line of his body. What about my things, my clothes, already packed and in storage, I interrupted. William's office has the details. You'll have access once you've signed the papers. I stood, our conversation concluded. Nathan remained seated, staring into the middle distance as if seeing the ruins of his carefully constructed life spread before him. Goodbye, Nathan, I said simply. He looked up, meeting my eyes one final time. In his gaze, I saw a complex mixture of anger, regret, and dawning comprehension. Goodbye, Emily Blackwood, he replied, emphasizing my full name with a bitterness that suggested he was still processing who I truly was, and what he had lost. I walked away without looking back, nodding discreetly to William's security team as I passed. The conversation had gone almost exactly as I had anticipated, yet I felt no triumph, no vindication in Nathan's defeat. Only a weary relief that this chapter was closing, and a quiet certainty that I had reclaimed something essential that had been slipping away during my years of self-imposed diminishment. Outside, the April night was unexpectedly mild, the air carrying the first hints of spring. My driver opened the car door as I approached. Back to the lake house, Ms. Blackwood? No, I decided suddenly. Take me home. The Beacon Hill residence? No, Newport, the family estate. If I was truly reclaiming my identity, it was time to return to the place that had shaped me. The sprawling Blackwood estate in Newport where generations of my family had summered, where my grandmother Eleanor had taught me about power and responsibility, and where I had always felt most authentically myself. The decision to return to the Newport estate wasn't impulsive, though it felt that way in the moment. As the town car merged onto I-93 South for the 90-minute drive to Rhode Island, I realized I had been moving toward this homecoming since the moment I discovered Nathan's betrayal. The Blackwood estate, with its 12 acres of manicured grounds overlooking the Atlantic, had been in my family for 5 generations. Unlike many of the ostentatious Newport cottages built by Gilded Age industrialists, our home was relatively understated, a gracious colonial revival mansion with clean lines and generous proportions rather than excessive ornament. My great-great-grandfather, who had built his publishing fortune on quality rather than flash, had approached his home with the same philosophy. I hadn't visited in nearly 3 years. After my parents' death, the estate had become both a comfort and a burden, a repository of memories both painful and precious. During my marriage to Nathan, I had deliberately kept him away from Newport, claiming the estate was being renovated or was tied up in family trusts. In truth, I had been protecting this last private piece of my identity, unwilling to share it with a man who had never truly seen me. The caretakers had been alerted to my arrival, and as we passed through the imposing wrought iron gates that marked the entrance to the property, I saw lights already illuminating the main house. Mrs. Sullivan, who had managed the household staff since my childhood, stood waiting on the front steps as the car pulled into the circular drive. "Ms. Blackwood," she greeted me warmly as I emerged from the car. Despite the late hour, nearly midnight, she was impeccably dressed in a simple black dress, her silver hair pulled back in its customary neat bun. "Welcome home." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I apologize for the late notice." "No apology necessary. Your rooms are prepared, and there's a light supper waiting in the morning room if you're hungry." Her expression revealed nothing, but I knew William must have briefed her on the basic situation. Mrs. Sullivan had survived 5 generations of Blackwood family dramas with unflappable discretion. The house welcomed me with familiar scents: lemon polish on the mahogany paneling, fresh flowers in the entrance hall, the faint hint of wood smoke from the library fireplace. Everything was exactly as I remembered, yet somehow more vivid, as if my senses had been dulled during my years of playing at being someone else. In the morning room, a cheerful space with windows that would capture the sunrise over the Atlantic, Mrs. Sullivan had indeed prepared a light supper that could have fed 3 people comfortably. Warm bread, cold chicken, fresh asparagus, and a decanter of the white burgundy that had been my father's favorite. "Will you be staying long, Ms. Blackwood?" she asked as she poured me a glass of wine. "A few days at least. I have meetings in Boston on Friday, but otherwise my schedule is flexible." I hesitated, then added, "There may be some media attention. The situation with Mr. Bennett is complicated." Mrs. Sullivan's expression didn't change, but a slight arch of her eyebrow conveyed volumes. "We're quite accustomed to managing complicated situations, Ms. Blackwood. The staff will be discreet, as always." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet house, sipping my wine and feeling the tension of the past 2 days gradually release. The confrontation with Nathan was behind me. The divorce would proceed according to the prenuptial agreement's terms. My professional reclamation was well underway, with the foundation and publishing divisions already adjusting to my return to active leadership. For the first time since discovering the emptied account, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Not just Nathan's betrayal, but my own complicity in creating the conditions for it. For 8 years, I had pretended to be less than I was, subordinating my identity to his ego, watching silently as he explained my own industry to me, nodding when he dismissed powerful women as tokens or figureheads. Why had I maintained the charade for so long? The question demanded an honest answer, even if only to myself. Part of it was psychological research interest, certainly. The fascinating experiment of seeing how a man like Nathan would treat a woman he perceived as professionally inferior. Part was the genuine desire to be loved for myself, not my family name or resources. but beneath those justifications lay something less admirable. Fear. Fear that if I revealed my true self, my intelligence, my ambition, my power, I would be unlovable. Fear that the men in my life would always see me as they had seen my mother and grandmother, intimidating rather than desirable, respected rather than cherished. Eleanor Blackwood had been widowed young and never remarried. My mother, brilliant and driven, had found partnership with my equally accomplished father, but their relationship had been more intellectual than romantic, at least to my childhood eyes. By allowing Nathan to believe I was essentially decorative, pretty, pleasant, unthreatening, I had been trying to have both love and respect without acknowledging that any love based on such a fundamental misunderstanding was inherently flawed. I thought about Vanessa Collins, now stranded in Cabo without the future Nathan had undoubtedly promised her. Was she complicit in his deception or another victim of it? Did she know he was married? Did she believe his promises of a new life together? At 26, was she simply flattered by the attention of a senior executive who appeared to have the means to fulfill his grandiose promises? The questions had no immediate answers, but they reminded me that Nathan's pattern of deception extended beyond our marriage. Vanessa was collateral damage in the explosion Nathan himself had detonated. My phone vibrated with a text from Rachel. "How did it go?" "As expected," I replied. "He threatened media exposure, then realized that would backfire. He'll sign the papers." "Where are you now? Back at the lake house?" "Newport. Needed to come home." Rachel's response came quickly. "Good. You need a fortress right now. Call me tomorrow." I promised I would, then set my phone aside and finished my meal in the peaceful quiet of the morning room, with only the distant sound of Atlantic waves for company. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: media management, divorce proceedings, the continued reclamation of my professional identity. But tonight, in my family home, I allowed myself one moment of purely personal acknowledgement. Emily Blackwood was back, and she would never again diminish herself for anyone else's comfort. I slept deeply that night, in the same room that had been mine since childhood, now updated with an adult's taste, but still oriented to capture the first rays of sunrise over the Atlantic. When I woke, it was to the gentle knock of Mrs. Sullivan bringing morning coffee. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood. It's 7:30. There's breakfast in the morning room whenever you're ready, and Mr. Porter called to say he'll be arriving at 10 with the documents you requested." I thanked her, accepting the coffee with gratitude. William's efficiency was as reliable as ever. I had texted him last night about my change in location, and he had immediately adjusted his plans to bring the divorce papers to Newport rather than Boston. After showering and dressing in a simple navy dress from the wardrobe Mrs. Sullivan had thoughtfully stocked with my clothes from storage, I made my way to the morning room. The space lived up to its name, filled with soft early light that transformed the elegant but cozy space into something almost ethereal. Breakfast awaited on the sideboard: fresh fruit, yogurt, pastries still warm from the oven, and a carafe of the strong coffee my grandmother had preferred. I helped myself and settled at the small table by the windows, where the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Boston Globe had been arranged in a neat fan. The Globe's business section featured a sidebar on the sudden leadership changes at the Blackwood Foundation, noting my return to active management and the concurrent shifts in financial relationships with several major firms, including Meridian Capital. The article was factual and relatively dry, mentioning my marriage to finance executive Nathan Bennett only in passing. The Financial Times, however, was more direct. Blackwood heiress returns to empire, divorces Meridian exec amid financial misconduct allegations. The accompanying photo showed me leaving the foundation offices yesterday, looking composed and professional in my navy suit. So it had begun, the public dissection of the end of my marriage. I had anticipated this, even planned for it with The carefully timed press releases and strategic leaks orchestrated by the Foundation's PR team. The narrative we were establishing placed the focus on my professional return rather than my personal life, framing the divorce as a footnote rather than the headline. My phone rang as I was finishing breakfast. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. "Have you seen the coverage?" she asked without preamble. "Just the Globe and Financial Times. Nothing too sensationalist yet. Boston Business Journal is running a more detailed piece later today. They reached out for comment about the divorce specifically. Williams' team is handling it with the approved statement about irreconcilable differences and mutual decision to part ways. They've been instructed to emphasize your professional return and minimize the personal aspects. And Nathan? Has he made any public statements?" "Not so far. He checked out of the Liberty this morning and has gone to ground. Our sources say he's staying with a former colleague in Cambridge." I processed this information, trying to gauge Nathan's likely next move. Retreat could indicate acceptance, or it could mean he was planning something less direct than the media threat he had mentioned last night. "Keep monitoring the situation," I instructed. "And have William activate the contingency plan for the charity gala next week. I think it's time I made my first public appearance as Emily Blackwood, newly single and focusing on expanding the Foundation's work." "Bold move," Rachel observed, approval evident in her tone. "Taking control of the narrative directly rather than through press releases." "Precisely. Make sure the guest list includes key figures from the publishing and philanthropy worlds, but also strategic additions from finance, particularly those who might be receptive to new investment partnerships. You're going to use a charity gala to recruit Meridian's clients," Rachel said, not a question but a realization. "I'm going to use a charity gala to remind Boston's financial elite where true influence lies," I corrected, "and to ensure Nathan understands that his actions have permanently closed certain doors." After ending the call with Rachel, I walked through the quiet house, reacquainting myself with rooms I hadn't visited in years. The library, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves containing first editions from Blackwood Publishing's earliest days. The formal dining room where my grandmother had hosted legendary dinners for authors, politicians, and cultural luminaries. The small study off the main hall where my father had taught me to read financial statements and my mother had explained the responsibility that came with the Blackwood name. In each room, I felt the weight of family legacy, not as a burden, but as a foundation supporting the choices I was now making. For generations, Blackwoods had used their resources and influence to shape cultural conversations through publishing, to address social needs through philanthropy, and to create financial opportunities through strategic investments. Now it was my turn to extend that legacy, not as Emily Bennett, the supportive wife, but as Emily Blackwood, the leader in her own right. By the time William Porter arrived at 10 o'clock precisely, I had settled in the garden room overlooking the rose gardens, ready to conclude the legal aspects of my marriage with the same efficiency I brought to business matters. William looked as impeccable as always, his silver hair catching the sunlight as he entered, leather portfolio tucked under one arm. He greeted me with formal warmth, then immediately turned to business. "The divorce papers are straightforward," he explained, spreading the documents on the table between us. "Given the prenuptial agreement's clear language regarding financial misconduct and the evidence we've gathered, Mr. Bennett has no viable legal challenge." I skimmed the documents, noting the clinical language that reduced 8 years of marriage to a series of legal provisions and property divisions. "He gets nothing?" The question surprised me as it left my lips, a sudden twinge of, not guilt exactly, but recognition of the harsh reality Nathan now faced. William's expression softened slightly. "The prenup's punitive clauses are indeed comprehensive, but as you instructed, we've included a modest settlement, enough to restart his life without public assistance, but not enough to maintain his previous lifestyle. The Newport condominium will remain in the Blackwood Trust, and the Beacon Hill residence was always trust property, so those revert to you exclusively." I nodded, scanning the financial provisions more carefully. The settlement amounted to approximately 1 year of Nathan's former salary at Meridian, enough to live on while rebuilding his career, but not enough to consider himself compensated for the marriage. Has he seen these terms yet? His newly retained attorney received the preliminary documents this morning. We expect a response by close of business today, though given the circumstances, there's little room for negotiation. I signed where indicated, the pen scratching softly against the heavy paper. With each signature, I felt another thread connecting me to Nathan Bennett severing cleanly. "What's his likely next move in your assessment?" I asked as William gathered the signed papers. William considered this question with the careful precision that had made him such a valued advisor to 3 generations of Blackwoods. Professionally, he'll attempt to secure a position outside Boston. New York or Chicago, most likely. Somewhere his reputation hasn't been as thoroughly damaged. Personally, he hesitated. Men like Mr. Bennett rarely accept defeat gracefully, especially at the hands of a woman they've underestimated. I would anticipate some attempt to reframe the narrative in a way that preserves his ego. The vengeful heiress story. Precisely. Though as you pointed out to him, any such narrative inevitably highlights his own failures of judgment and character. After William departed with the signed documents, I spent the afternoon working remotely, connecting with Marcus about the publishing division's reorganization plans and reviewing the Foundation's upcoming grant cycle. The familiar rhythm of meaningful work felt like rediscovering a favorite piece of music. The notes exactly where I remembered them, the harmony immediately recognizable. Late in the afternoon, Rachel called with an update. Nathan's attorney has responded to the divorce terms, she reported. They're requesting a face-to-face meeting to discuss, quote, more equitable distribution of marital assets. I smiled, slightly at the predictable response. Declined. The terms are non-negotiable given the documented misconduct. Already conveyed. Also, the attorney hinted that Nathan has been approached by several media outlets for his side of the story. Implied threat that he might accept if the settlement isn't increased. Let him, I replied, surprising myself with how little the threat concerned me now. Any story he tells will reflect worse on him than on me. William has already prepared statements responding to various potential narratives, all of which emphasize the financial misconduct and infidelity rather than my family history. There's more, Rachel continued, her tone shifting to something more serious. Background checks on Vanessa Collins have revealed something interesting. She previously worked as an assistant to Victor Hargrove at Summit Financial. The name triggered immediate recognition. Victor Hargrove was Meridian Capital's chief competitor and had a long-standing rivalry with the firm. More specifically, he had a personal vendetta against Walter Simmons, who had left Summit to join Meridian's board 5 years ago, taking several major clients with him. You think she was planted at Meridian? The implications were significant. Industrial. Espionage rather than a simple office affair. It's a working theory. Her qualifications for the financial analyst position were questionable at best. And her relationship with Nathan began shortly after he was assigned to the Westfield acquisition, a deal Summit tried and failed to secure last year. My mind raced, connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. Nathan's sudden interest in the Westfield deal despite it being outside his usual portfolio. His increased late nights and business trips coinciding with the acquisition talks. The offshore accounts established just as the deal was nearing completion. He was selling information, I said, the realization crystallizing. Using the affair, with Vanessa as cover for passing acquisition details to Summit. It looks that way. Williams' team is investigating further, but if confirmed, this goes beyond marital infidelity into potential criminal liability. Corporate espionage, insider trading if he was adjusting investments based on non-public information. Contact Walter Simmons immediately, I instructed. He needs to know about this connection before Meridian's internal investigation uncovers it. And have William prepare a brief for the SEC. We don't want to file it yet, but we should be ready if this escalates. The implications were staggering. If Nathan had indeed been selling corporate secrets to Summit through Vanessa, his professional, exile would become permanent. No financial firm would touch him, not just in Boston, but anywhere in the industry. The carefully constructed career he had pursued so single-mindedly would be irrevocably destroyed. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: shock at the scale of Nathan's deception, vindication that my instincts about his character had proven correct, and a strange sense of sadness for the man who had risked everything: marriage, career, reputation, for what? Money? Status? The validation of a younger woman who was, it seemed, manipulating him as thoroughly as he thought he was using her? As the afternoon light began to fade, I walked to the cliff path that ran along the property's edge overlooking the Atlantic. The path had been my grandmother Eleanor's favorite place for reflection, and I found myself drawn there now, seeking her wisdom across the years that separated us. Eleanor Blackwood had taken control of the family publishing empire in 1962 after her husband's unexpected death, shocking Boston society by refusing to sell to the male executives who assumed she would step aside. Instead, she had expanded the business, establishing new imprints, embracing controversial authors, and eventually diversifying into what would become the Foundation. All while raising my father alone and navigating a business world that barely acknowledged women's capabilities. "Men will underestimate you, Emily," she had told me once as we walked this very path. "That's not a disadvantage unless you internalize it. Their underestimation gives you room to maneuver, to observe, to prepare. Use it." I had taken her advice perhaps too literally, allowing Nathan to underestimate me to the point of completely misunderstanding who I was. The experiment had yielded valuable data about his character, certainly, but at the cost of years living beneath my capabilities. My phone vibrated with a text from William. "Urgent development. Call immediately." I dialed his number, apprehension building as I waited for him to answer. "Emily." William's voice was tight with controlled tension. "Nathan Bennett has just been taken into custody by the FBI. Charges include securities fraud, wire fraud, and corporate espionage related to the Westfield acquisition." I stopped walking, the ocean waves crashing below suddenly seeming very loud in the silence that followed his statement. "When? How?" "Approximately 30 minutes ago, Meridian's internal investigation uncovered communications between Bennett and Summit Financial that raised serious concerns. They contacted the authorities, who moved quickly given the nature of the evidence and concerns he might flee the jurisdiction." "And Vanessa Collins?" "Also in custody, arrested in Cabo before she could board a flight to Geneva. It appears she was the primary conduit for information between Bennett and Summit." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Nathan's betrayal extended far beyond our marriage. He had betrayed his professional obligations, violated federal securities laws, and compromised his firm's strategic position, all while believing he was the clever one, the man who had found a way to leap ahead of his peers through unseen advantage. "William, we need to distance the Foundation from this immediately. Prepare a statement expressing shock at the allegations and emphasizing that Mr. Bennett had no role in Foundation management or access to its financial decision-making. And contact Walter Simmons. Meridian will be doing damage control, and we need to coordinate our responses." "Already in progress," William assured me, and Emily. "This changes the divorce proceedings significantly. Criminal charges of this nature trigger additional clauses in the prenuptial agreement." I knew immediately which clauses he meant. Provisions my father had insisted on including in any Blackwood marriage contract after a distant cousin had married a man later convicted of financial crimes. Those clauses eliminated even the modest, settlement we had been prepared to offer, protecting the family completely from any association with criminal financial misconduct. Wait on implementing those provisions, I decided after a moment's reflection. Let's see how the criminal case develops first. After ending the call with William, I remained on the cliff path, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before me, its vastness a reminder of perspective. My marriage to Nathan, which had occupied 8 years of my life and felt all-consuming just days ago, was merely one chapter in a much longer story. Nathan's arrest was not of my orchestration, though the events I had set in motion, the freezing of accounts, the internal investigation at Meridian, had undoubtedly accelerated the discovery of his wider misconduct. He had built the structure of his own downfall brick by brick, with choices that reflected a fundamental character flaw: the belief that he was entitled to more than he had earned, by whatever means necessary. As I turned back toward the house, now glowing with warm light against the darkening sky, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of a failed marriage, but the heavier weight of having lived beneath my true self for so long. The trust fund activation letter had indeed changed everything, but not in the way Nathan might have thought. It hadn't just restored my access to family resources, it had activated my return to authenticity. Emily Blackwood was fully awake now, after 8 years of deliberately muted existence. And she had work to do. The news of Nathan's arrest broke across Boston's financial community like a thunderclap. By morning, it dominated the business sections of every major newspaper and had spilled over into national financial media. Meridian executive arrested in espionage scheme, declared the Wall Street Journal. FBI charges Boston financial manager with selling secrets to competitor, reported the Financial Times. The coverage inevitably mentioned our marriage and pending divorce, but as William had predicted, the criminal charges completely overshadowed any narrative Nathan might have attempted about being deceived by a wealthy heiress. Instead, the stories painted a picture of a desperate man willing to betray not just his wife, but his professional obligations for financial gain. I monitored the coverage from Newport, where I had decided to remain for the rest of the week, managing the foundation and publishing division remotely while the media storm played out. William's carefully crafted statement expressing the foundation's shock at the allegations and emphasizing Nathan's complete separation from Blackwood financial interests had been widely quoted, establishing the narrative we needed. Rachel arrived mid-morning, having driven down from Boston with additional documents requiring my attention and updates too sensitive for phone or email. The FBI interviewed 2 of Nathan's direct reports at Meridian yesterday, she reported, as we settled in the garden room. Apparently, he had been pressuring them to focus their analysis on specific aspects of the Westfield acquisition that, in retrospect, would have been particularly valuable to Summit. And Vanessa Collins? Singing like a canary, according to my sources at the U.S. Attorney's Office. She's positioning herself as a reluctant participant, claiming Nathan manipulated her into the arrangement with Summit. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. And her previous employment with Victor Hargrove? She's claiming that connection was coincidental, that Hargrove reached out after learning she was dating Nathan, not that she sought the position at Meridian specifically to target him. It was a plausible defense strategy, though whether prosecutors or a jury would believe it remained to be seen. The evidence of Nathan's culpability, however, appeared overwhelming. Has he made any public statements or attempted to contact me? Rachel shook her head. His attorney issued a brief statement claiming the charges are based on misunderstandings and that Mr. Bennett looks forward to clearing his name. As for contact, he's been denied bail as a flight risk, given the offshore accounts and his recent attempt to leave the country. The reality of Nathan sitting in a cell awaiting trial for federal charges should have brought some satisfaction. Poetic justice for the man who had planned to leave me financially devastated. Instead, I felt a complicated mix of vindication and pity. Nathan's flaws had been evident from the beginning, if I had been willing to see them clearly. His charm, confidence, and ambition had masked a profound insecurity and moral flexibility that had ultimately been his undoing. "The charity gala is still on for next Thursday," Rachel continued, shifting to more practical matters. "Acceptances are running about 40% above normal. Everyone wants to see Emily Blackwood's first public appearance since the scandal broke. The guest list includes key executives from every major financial firm in Boston, except Summit, plus publishing. Industry leaders, foundation directors, and the usual society names." I nodded, mentally preparing for the public scrutiny this appearance would bring. The gala would mark my official return to Boston society not as Nathan Bennett's supportive wife, but as Emily Blackwood, heir to the publishing fortune and foundation chairwoman. The contrast between those identities, and public recognition of which had been real all along, would be the subtext of every conversation, every glance, every media report. "I'll need a new dress," I said, the banality of the statement striking me as funny after the intensity of recent events. Rachel smiled, recognizing the moment of lightness. "Already handled. 3 options are being delivered tomorrow, all suitable for a woman reclaiming her power and position without appearing to gloat over her disgraced soon-to-be ex-husband." "You know me too well." "I know Emily Blackwood," she corrected gently. "I never really knew Emily Bennett. She was a character you were playing, convincingly, I might add, but never authentically you." Her observation struck a chord. How many people in my life could say they knew the real me? How many had I allowed close enough to see beyond the eye? Careful performance of whichever role I was playing. Dutiful daughter, capable chairwoman, supportive wife? The question lingered as Rachel and I moved through the day's business, reviewing legal briefs related to the divorce proceedings, discussing the foundation's upcoming initiatives, strategizing about the publishing division's digital expansion. Plans. In each conversation, I found myself speaking more directly, making decisions more quickly, and expressing opinions more forcefully than I had in years. The liberation of no longer filtering my thoughts through the lens of how they might appear to Nathan was both exhilarating and sobering. By late afternoon, when Rachel departed for Boston, I had signed off on major initiatives that would reshape both the foundation's giving priorities and the publishing division's market position. Decisions I might once have discussed with Nathan as a formality, not because I valued his input, but because I had been playing the role of wife seeking her husband's counsel, now flowed naturally from my own judgment and expertise. As evening approached, I walked again along the cliff path, watching the sun sink toward the Atlantic horizon in a spectacular display of gold and crimson. The beauty reminded me of a conversation with my grandmother in this same spot years ago, shortly after I had completed my doctorate. "Power isn't about controlling others, Emily," she had said, her eyes on the distant horizon. "It's about the freedom to be fully yourself without apology or diminishment. Everything else is just leverage." At the time, I hadn't fully understood her distinction. Now, having spent 8 years deliberately diminishing myself for Nathan's comfort, I recognized the profound truth in her words. True power wasn't Nathan's desperate grabbing for status, money, and validation, but my current ability to stand alone, making choices aligned with my values and vision without reference to anyone else's expectations. The emptied bank account that had triggered this cascade of revelations now seemed almost trivial, a clumsy attempt by a small man to seize what he perceived as power, unaware that real power had been quietly observing him all along. The trust fund activation letter had indeed changed everything, but not in the way either Nathan or I had initially thought. It hadn't just restored my access to family resources or triggered the legal protections of the prenuptial agreement. It had activated my return to myself, a self I had willingly set aside for a relationship that had proven unworthy of such sacrifice. As darkness fell over Newport, I turned back toward the house, its windows glowing with warm welcome against the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in managing the aftermath of Nathan's arrest, preparing for the charity gala, and continuing to reclaim my professional identity. But tonight, I allowed myself one moment of purely personal acknowledgement. The woman walking this path was finally, unreservedly, Emily Blackwood again. And she would never again make herself smaller for anyone else's comfort. The charity gala had been a tradition of the Blackwood Foundation for over 30 years, raising millions for literacy programs across New England. This year's event, held in the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel, took on additional significance as my first public appearance since the scandal broke. I arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, stepping from the car in a deep emerald gown that managed to convey both elegance and authority. The dress had been Rachel's top recommendation, regal without being ostentatious, as she had described it. My grandmother's diamonds glinted at my ears and throat, subtle symbols of the Blackwood legacy I was now fully embracing again. Cameras flashed as I paused briefly on the red carpet, offering a composed smile to the society photographers and financial press who had turned out in unprecedented numbers. Inside, William Porter waited to escort me into the ballroom, his presence a deliberate statement about the Blackwood family's unified response to recent events. "You look magnificent," he murmured as I took his arm. "Eleanor would be proud." The ballroom had been transformed with tasteful spring floral arrangements, subtle lighting, and the foundation's emblem, an open book against a rising sun, displayed prominently above the stage. 300 of Boston's most influential citizens turned almost in unison as I entered, conversations pausing momentarily before resuming with increased intensity. I felt the weight of their scrutiny, the unspoken questions and assumptions hovering in the air. Was I devastated by my husband's betrayal and arrest, or triumphant in my reclaimed identity? A victim of circumstances, or the architect of Nathan's downfall? The speculation was palpable, but so was something else. A new respect, perhaps even a hint of wariness, as Boston's elite reassessed their understanding of who Emily Blackwood truly was. Marcus Daniels approached immediately, his warm greeting, providing a buffer against the room's collective curiosity. "You've caused quite a stir," he said quietly, steering me toward a group of Foundation board members. "Walter Simmons has been fielding questions all evening about Meridian's internal investigation and how they missed the warning signs with Bennett." "And what is Walter saying?" I asked, genuinely curious about how Meridian was positioning itself in the wake of the scandal. That appropriate due diligence was conducted during hiring, but that Bennett executed a sophisticated deception that exploited procedural vulnerabilities. Standard corporate damage control, but delivered with enough specific detail to be credible. Marcus glanced around the room. He's also making it clear that Meridian values its relationship with the Blackwood Foundation and is implementing enhanced protocols to prevent similar situations. The message was clear. Meridian was distancing itself from Nathan while simultaneously reaffirming its commitment to maintaining good relations with the Foundation and, by extension, with me. The financial implications of this positioning weren't lost on anyone in the room. Nathan might have been a rising star at Meridian, but he was ultimately expendable. The Blackwood accounts were not. As I circulated through the ballroom, I noted the subtle shifts in how people interacted with me. Gone was the vaguely condescending deference once offered to Mrs. Bennett, the supportive Foundation assistant. In its place was a new recognition, sometimes uncomfortable, often calculating, of my actual position and influence. Senior partners from Boston's top law firms, who had previously directed their substantive comments to Nathan while offering me polite small talk, now engaged earnestly on topics ranging from estate tax reform to publishing industry consolidation. Bank executives who had barely acknowledged my presence at previous events now sought introductions, their business cards appearing with remarkable frequency. Only those who had known me before my marriage, old family friends, longtime foundation supporters, my parents' contemporaries, seemed unsurprised by the transformation. To them, I was simply Emily Blackwood again, returned from a curious detour into anonymity. "I never understood why you downplayed your background," commented Eliza Cabot, a contemporary of my mother's who had known me since childhood. "Though I suspect you learned quite a bit about human nature in the process." "More than I anticipated," I admitted, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Eliza's shrewd eyes assessed me over the rim of her own glass. "And was it worth it? 8 years playing a role for a man who ultimately betrayed you?" The question was blunt, but Eliza had earned the right to such directness through decades of forthright friendship with the Blackwood women. "I'm still determining the answer to that," I replied honestly. The data gathered was certainly illuminating, if not particularly flattering to either Nathan or myself. Eliza nodded, accepting this. "Eleanor used to say that sometimes we need to take detours to appreciate the main road. Your grandmother was rarely wrong about such things." The evening progressed with speeches, the obligatory auction of donated luxury items, and the announcement of this year's grant recipients. As Foundation chairwoman, I delivered the closing remarks, a carefully crafted address that acknowledged recent personal challenges, only in passing, while focusing primarily on the Foundation's expanded literacy initiatives and new publishing scholarships for underprivileged students. The Blackwood legacy has always been about words, their power, their accessibility, and their ability to transform lives, I concluded, looking out over the attentive crowd. That mission continues unchanged, regardless of personal circumstances or public attention. The Foundation remains committed to ensuring that everyone has access to the tools of self-expression and the opportunities that literacy provides. The applause was enthusiastic. The message received. Emily Blackwood was not defined by her marriage or its dissolution, but by the family legacy she carried forward. As I stepped away from the podium, I caught Walter Simmons' appreciative nod. From across the room, acknowledgement of a public relations maneuver executed with precision. As the formal program concluded and guests began to depart, Rachel appeared at my elbow, phone in hand and expression tense. "Nathan's attorney just issued a statement," she said quietly, guiding me toward a quiet alcove off the main ballroom. "You'll want to see this." The statement, released to financial media outlets during the gala, read, "Mr. Bennett categorically denies all charges of financial impropriety and corporate espionage. He maintains that his communications with Summit Financial were authorized as part of a counterintelligence operation sanctioned by senior Meridian management. Furthermore, Mr. Bennett asserts that his wife, Emily Blackwood, was fully aware of both his professional activities and the purpose of the offshore accounts, which were established with her knowledge and approval as tax planning vehicles. Mr. Bennett looks forward to clearing his name and revealing the full circumstances of what he describes as a calculated attempt to use the justice system for personal vengeance." I read the statement twice, marveling at Nathan's audacity even as I recognized the desperate strategy behind it. Unable to deny the documented communications with Summit given the evidence against him, he was attempting to reframe them as authorized corporate intelligence gathering. Unable to explain the offshore accounts given their clear connection to Summit payments, he was trying to implicate me in their creation. "He's drowning and grabbing at anything that might keep him afloat," I observed, handing the phone back to Rachel. "Even if it means trying to pull me under with him." "It's a desperate move," Rachel agreed, her expression grim, "but potentially damaging if any media outlets report his claims without proper context or verification." "Have William prepare a statement immediately," I instructed. "Categorical denial of any knowledge of or involvement in Nathan's financial improprieties, emphasizing that the temporary separation of my professional identity from my personal life was a choice made for reasons entirely unrelated to any awareness of illegal activity." Rachel nodded, already typing notes. "Also, We should have Marcus issue a separate statement from the foundation reminding everyone that you had stepped back from day-to-day financial operations during your marriage, precisely to avoid any appearance of conflicts of interest. Good. And contact Walter Simmons. Meridian needs to respond immediately to Nathan's claim about sanctioned counterintelligence. They can't allow that narrative to gain any traction. As Rachel stepped away to make the necessary calls, I returned to the dwindling crowd in the ballroom, maintaining the composed exterior expected of a Blackwood even as my mind processed Nathan's latest betrayal. Even now, facing federal charges and the ruins of his career, his instinct was to deflect responsibility and attempt to implicate others, including his wife, rather than accept the consequences of his own actions. The pattern was so consistent, it was almost comforting in its predictability. Nathan had never accepted responsibility for failure or setback. It was always market conditions, or unsupportive colleagues, or clients who didn't understand the long-term strategy. Now, faced with the ultimate professional and personal failure, he was reaching for the same familiar playbook, only this time with considerably higher stakes. By the time I left the gala shortly before midnight, William's team had already issued our official response to Nathan's claims, and early media reports were treating his statement with appropriate skepticism. The financial press, in particular, seemed disinclined to give credence to the authorized counterintelligence explanation without substantial corroboration, which Meridian's swift denial had effectively precluded. Back at the Newport estate, I found myself too restless for sleep despite the late hour. The confrontation with Nathan, even at this remove through dueling press statements, had stirred emotions I had thought safely processed and contained. Not love or loyalty, those had been extinguished by his betrayal, but a lingering sadness for what might have been if he had been capable of seeing me, truly seeing me, rather than the convenient reflection of his own expectations. I wandered to the library, drawn to the comfort of books that had been companions throughout my life. The room's mahogany shelves housed first editions from Blackwood Publishing's distinguished history, alongside my grandfather's collection of maritime literature and my father's economic treatises. My own editions, contemporary fiction, psychological research, and management theory, occupied a smaller section near the window seat that had been my favorite reading spot since childhood. Curled in that same window seat now, watching moonlight silver the Atlantic beyond the cliffs, I found myself reaching for a volume I hadn't opened in years. My grandmother Eleanor's personal journal from the year after my grandfather's death, when she had taken control of the publishing house against the advice of every business associate and family friend. "They tell me I cannot possibly understand the business well enough to lead it," she had written in her precise, elegant hand. Their concern would be touching if it were not so transparently self-serving. Harrison trained me from the beginning, knowing his heart was weak. What these men perceive as my sudden elevation was in fact years in careful preparation. Their underestimation is not a burden, but a strategic advantage. Let them believe what they wish about my capabilities. Their surprise when I exceed their limited expectations will be all the sweeter. Reading her words across the decades, I felt a renewed connection to the women of my family who had navigated similar waters before me. Eleanor facing down publishing executives who thought a widow should sell rather than lead. My mother expanding the foundation's work globally, despite resistance from traditional philanthropy circles. Each had faced skepticism, underestimation, and outright opposition from men who believed they knew better. And each had prevailed not through confrontation, but through strategic patience, allowing their actions and results to speak more eloquently than any defense or declaration could have done. I closed the journal, a renewed sense of clarity settling over me. Nathan's desperate allegations would fade quickly against the evidence of his wrongdoing and the consistent pattern of my professional conduct, both before our marriage and since our separation. My reputation would be judged not by his accusations, but by the Foundation's continued good work, the publishing division's renewed innovation, and my own measured response to adversity. With that realization came another, more personal insight. The 8 years of my marriage had not been wasted, despite Nathan's ultimate betrayal. They had been a laboratory for understanding power, perception, and the often invisible assumptions that shaped how men like Nathan viewed the world and the women in it. That knowledge would serve me well as I reclaimed my place in Boston's financial and philanthropic communities, not as anyone's wife, but as Emily Blackwood, a leader in her own right. The following morning brought news that vindicated my strategic decision not to engage directly with Nathan's allegations. The Wall Street Journal published a detailed analysis of Meridian Capital's internal investigation, including excerpts from Nathan's emails to Vanessa Collins that directly contradicted his claim of authorized corporate intelligence gathering. "V. Need to move carefully on the Westfield information," one quoted email read. "S values this particularly, and the compensation reflects that. M would shut this down immediately if they suspected." The reference to S, presumably Summit, and M, Meridian, made the unauthorized nature of Nathan's actions difficult to dispute, even for the most sympathetic observer. By mid-morning, his attorney had issued a revised statement acknowledging that Mr. Bennett may have exceeded authorized parameters in some communications, but maintaining that the offshore accounts were legitimate tax planning vehicles. Rachel called as I was reviewing the coverage over breakfast in the morning room. "His attorney reached out to William this morning," she reported. "They're floating the possibility of a joint statement that would absolve you of any knowledge of Nathan's activities in exchange for your support of a plea agreement with prosecutors." Meaning? Meaning Nathan wants to cut a deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office, pleading guilty to lesser charges in exchange for cooperation against Summit. He thinks your public support might help convince prosecutors he's genuinely remorseful and deserves leniency. I considered this unexpected development. Nathan was essentially offering to publicly clear my name in exchange for helping him avoid the full consequences of his actions. Another transaction, another negotiation, even as he faced criminal charges. What's William's recommendation? That we decline any joint statement, but inform prosecutors through appropriate channels that you have no objection to a reasonable plea agreement based on genuine cooperation. This keeps you completely separate from Nathan's legal issues while not actively working against a resolution that might ultimately serve justice by targeting Summit's apparently systematic corporate espionage efforts. The approach was characteristically measured, maintaining my distance from Nathan's legal troubles while allowing the broader interests of justice to be served. It was exactly the kind of balanced response that had guided Blackwood family decisions for generations. "Agreed," I said. "No joint statement, no public involvement in his legal strategy whatsoever. But William can communicate our neutral position to the prosecutors if that would be helpful." After ending the call with Rachel, I spent the morning reviewing quarterly reports from the publishing division's digital initiatives, a project I had championed before stepping back from active management, and which now showed promising early results. The familiar rhythm of meaningful work provided a welcome counterpoint to the ongoing drama of Nathan's case and our divorce proceedings. Mid-afternoon brought another call, this one from Marcus Daniels. "The Boston Business Journal is planning a feature on the Foundation's expanded literacy initiatives," he began without preamble. "They've requested an in-depth interview with you specifically, focusing on your vision for the Foundation's future now that you've resumed active leadership. Professional focus rather than personal drama," I noted appreciatively. "When would they want to do this?" "Next week, ideally. And Emily, they've specifically requested to conduct the interview at the Foundation offices rather than Newport or Beacon Hill. I think they're trying to position this as forward-looking rather than retrospective, the Foundation's future rather than your past." The request made strategic sense. The Foundation's historic headquarters in Boston's Back Bay embodied its institutional mission in a way that my personal residences, however impressive, could not. Conducting the interview there would emphasize my professional identity rather than my personal circumstances. Schedule it for Wednesday, I decided. I'll be back in Boston by then. And Marcus, make sure they understand that questions about Nathan's case or our divorce proceedings are off limits. This is about the Foundation's work, not my private life. Already established as a condition of the interview, Marcus assured me. They're surprisingly eager to focus on the literacy initiatives and digital accessibility programs. I think there's genuine interest in the Foundation's work beyond the recent publicity. After concluding the call with Marcus, I spent the remainder of the afternoon walking the estate's extensive grounds, mentally preparing for my return to Boston and the public role I would now fully embrace. The week in Newport had provided necessary distance and perspective, a chance to process the cascade of revelations and realignments that had followed Nathan's betrayal. Now it was time to move forward, not as Emily Bennett returning to her maiden name after an unfortunate marriage, but as Emily Blackwood stepping fully into the legacy and responsibilities that had always been mine. The Foundation interview on Wednesday marked the beginning of this new chapter. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that conveyed serious purpose without severity, I arrived at the Foundation's Back Bay headquarters early to review the latest literacy program data and reacquaint myself with the dedicated staff who had maintained our mission during my partial absence. The Foundation occupied a beautifully restored 19th century townhouse, its traditional exterior belying the modern, efficient workspace within. The main conference room, where the interview would take place, featured floor-to-ceiling bookshelves holding first editions published by Blackwood over the years, alongside photographs documenting the Foundation's global literacy initiatives. Jessica Chen, the Business Journal's finance and philanthropy editor, arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a photographer and assistant. In her mid-30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, she represented a new generation of financial journalists who approached philanthropy with the same analytical rigor as any other business sector. Ms. Blackwood, thank you for making time for this interview, she began as we settled at the conference table. The Foundation's expanded initiatives come at an interesting moment in digital publishing and educational access. I'm particularly interested in how you're addressing the urban-rural digital divide in literacy programs. What followed was a substantive 90-minute discussion of the Foundation's work, its historical focus on traditional literacy, its evolution to embrace digital access and education, and its current initiatives bridging technological divides in underserved communities. Throughout, Jessica's questions remained focused on programmatic details, strategic vision, and measurable outcomes, with no attempts to steer the conversation toward personal matters. It was only as the interview concluded that she broached the subject of my return to active leadership. The Foundation has obviously maintained its core mission during your step back from day-to-day operations, she observed carefully. But now that you've resumed full leadership, are there specific priorities or changes in direction you're implementing that might not have happened otherwise? The question was professionally framed, but contained the subtle invitation to acknowledge the circumstances of my return without directly referencing Nathan or the scandal. Continuity has always been a Blackwood family value, I replied, choosing my words with care. The Foundation's mission transcends any individual leader, including me. That said, I bring particular interest in expanding our digital literacy programs internationally and developing new partnerships with both traditional publishers and technology companies to address emerging challenges in information accessibility. And these priorities reflect your personal vision as well as the institutional mission. They reflect my conviction that access to reliable information and the skills to evaluate it critically are fundamental to both individual opportunity and societal progress, I said. That conviction has only strengthened during my time away from direct management, as I've observed both technological innovation and persistent barriers to equitable access. Jessica nodded, apparently satisfied with this forward-looking response that acknowledged my absence without dwelling on its Causes. One final question, if I may, she said, closing her notebook. The Blackwood name has long been associated with publishing and philanthropy in Boston. How do you see your role in continuing that legacy while adapting it for contemporary challenges? It was the perfect closing question, professionally relevant, personally meaningful, and completely separate from the recent drama of my marriage and divorce. The Blackwood legacy isn't about preserving traditions for their own sake, I replied, thinking of my grandmother's journal and her willingness to challenge publishing conventions. It's about maintaining core values, intellectual integrity, access to information, support for creative expression, while constantly evolving how those values are expressed in changing circumstances. My role is to honor that balance between continuity and innovation, just as my grandmother and parents did before me. After Jessica and her team departed, I remained in the conference room, reflecting on the interview and its focus on the Foundation's work rather than my personal life. It represented exactly the kind of professional recognition I had stepped away from during my marriage, not from lack of capability or interest, but from the misguided belief that maintaining a normal relationship required diminishing my public profile and professional identity. Marcus joined me, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an expression of quiet satisfaction. That went exceptionally well, he observed, placing 1 cup in front of me. She seemed genuinely interested in the work, not just using it as a pretext to ask about recent events. A pleasant surprise, I agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. Though I suspect the Business Journal recognizes there's more long-term value in establishing a productive relationship with the Foundation than in pursuing one more angle on Nathan's case. Speaking of which, Marcus hesitated briefly. William called while you were in the interview. Nathan's attorney has finalized a plea agreement with prosecutors. He'll plead guilty to wire fraud and securities fraud in exchange for cooperation against Summit Financial, particularly Victor Hargrove. The corporate espionage charges are being dropped as part of the deal. I absorbed this information with a complicated mixture of emotions. The plea agreement meant Nathan would likely face a substantially reduced sentence, perhaps as little as 2 to 3 years in federal prison, rather than the 10 to 15 years the original charges might have carried. It also meant the case would conclude relatively quickly, without the extended public spectacle of a trial. And the divorce? I asked, thinking of the parallel legal proceedings that had continued alongside the criminal case. Moving forward as planned. Nathan's attorney has withdrawn all objections to the original terms, likely recognizing that any challenge to the prenuptial agreement would be both futile and potentially damaging to his plea deal positioning. So, Nathan had finally accepted the inevitable, choosing the path of least resistance now that his attempts to deflect blame and renegotiate terms had failed. It was consistent with his character: pragmatic adaptation when confrontation proved unproductive, strategic retreat when advantage could not be gained. William believes the divorce can be finalized within 30 days, Marcus continued. All financial matters have been resolved according to the prenuptial terms, and given the circumstances, the court is likely to expedite the proceedings. 30 days. In just 1 month, my 8-year marriage would be legally dissolved, the formal end to a relationship that had already concluded emotionally and practically. The thought brought neither sadness nor satisfaction, just a quiet acknowledgement of necessary closure. Thank you, Marcus, I said, rising from the conference table. Please let William know I approve moving forward with the expedited process. As I gathered my things to leave, Marcus remained, his expression suggesting he had more to say. Emily, there's one other matter. The Newport School of Design has approached the Foundation about establishing a scholarship program for young women pursuing careers in publishing and media. They've suggested naming it after your grandmother, the Eleanor Blackwood Opportunity Fund. The proposal touched me deeply. My grandmother had been a passionate advocate for women in publishing during an era when female executives were rare and often marginalized, A scholarship in her name, focused on opening doors for a new generation of women, would be a fitting tribute to her legacy. "Draft a proposal for the board," I instructed, feeling a surge of genuine enthusiasm. I'd like to personally match the Foundation's commitment for the first 5 years of the program. As I left the Foundation offices and stepped into the bright spring afternoon, I felt a sense of alignment that had been missing for too long. My personal values, professional goals, and family legacy now moving in harmony rather than in carefully separated compartments. Nathan had emptied our joint account believing he was leaving me with nothing. Instead, he had inadvertently freed me to reclaim everything that mattered: my name, my purpose, and my authentic self. The trust fund activation letter had indeed changed everything, but not in the way either of us had anticipated. It had activated not just financial resources, but a return to wholeness that no amount of money could have purchased. As my driver navigated Boston's crowded streets toward the Beacon Hill house, which I had decided to sell once the divorce was final, too laden with memories of a life performed rather than lived, I found myself thinking not of Nathan or the collapsed marriage, but of the opportunities that lay ahead, the Foundation's expanded mission, the publishing division's digital innovations, the Newport Estates renovation to better reflect my personal aesthetic rather than inherited traditions. For the first time in 8 years, I was making choices, based solely on my own judgment and preferences, without the exhausting mental calculus of how they might appear to Nathan or affect his perception of our relationship. The freedom was exhilarating, the possibilities limitless. Emily Blackwood was fully herself again, no longer diminished by someone else's limited vision or expectations. And she was just getting started. 1 year after Nathan emptied our joint account, I stood in the newly renovated offices of the Blackwood publishing headquarters in Cambridge, watching the autumn sunlight stream through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The space had been transformed from traditional wood-paneled formality to an open, collaborative environment that better reflected my vision for the company's future while honoring its distinguished past. First editions of Blackwood's most important publications remained displayed in custom glass cases, but now they shared space with digital displays showcasing our newest interactive storytelling platforms and global literacy initiatives. The boardroom, where generations of publishing decisions had been made, was now a flexible meeting space featuring both antique furniture from the original offices and state-of-the-art technology. "The Boston Globe reporter is here for your interview," my assistant informed me, appearing discreetly at my side. "She's set up in the conference room as requested." "Thank you, Madeline. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The interview was part of a feature on women reshaping Boston's corporate landscape, a piece that would have been unimaginable during my marriage to Nathan, when I had deliberately maintained a low public profile. Now, as the fully acknowledged head of both Blackwood Publishing and the Foundation, I had embraced the platform my position provided to advocate for causes I believed in, particularly educational access and women's leadership opportunities. The reporter, Catherine Walsh, rose as I entered the conference room. In her early 40s, with an air of focused intelligence, she represented the kind of thoughtful journalism I had always respected. "Ms. Blackwood, thank you for making time for this interview," she began as we settled at the table. "The transformation of Blackwood Publishing over the past year has been remarkable by any standard. A 28% increase in digital market share, the successful launch of 3 new imprints focusing on underrepresented voices, and the innovative partnership with global education platforms. What drove this comprehensive reinvention of a company that was already considered successful?" It was a good opening question, substantive and focused on achievement rather than personality or personal history. I had come to appreciate journalists who approached their work this way, particularly after experiencing the more sensationalist coverage that had initially surrounded my divorce. "Transformation is perhaps too dramatic a term," I replied. "What we've done is return to first principles while adapting to current realities. My great-grandfather founded this company on the belief that publishing exists to connect meaningful ideas with the people who need them. The methods of making those connections have evolved dramatically, but the core purpose remains unchanged. Catherine nodded, making notes. And the emphasis on diverse voices and global accessibility, is that also a return to first principles? In many ways, yes. Blackwood published James Baldwin when other houses wouldn't touch his work. We brought out Rachel Carson's Silent Spring when environmental concerns were considered fringe issues. My grandmother used to say that a publisher's job is to amplify the voices that need to be heard, not just the ones that are easy to sell. The difference now is that technology allows us to identify and reach previously underserved audiences at scale. The interview continued in this vein for nearly an hour, touching on publishing trends, educational initiatives, and the broader cultural shifts affecting how people consumed and engaged with content. Throughout, Catherine maintained her focus on Blackwood's business strategy and my professional vision, with no attempts to steer the conversation toward my personal life or the now year-old scandal of Nathan's crimes. It was only as the interview drew to a close that she broached the subject indirectly. Many observers have noted that your return to full, public leadership of the Blackwood Enterprises coincided with significant personal challenges, she said carefully. Without delving into private matters, I'm curious whether you see a connection between navigating those challenges and the clarity of vision you've brought to the company's transformation. The question was thoughtfully framed, offering an opportunity to address the elephant in the room without sensationalizing it. I considered my response carefully. Life rarely separates itself into neat categories of personal and professional, I said finally. The experiences that shape us as individuals inevitably influence our leadership approaches and priorities. What I will say is that authenticity, being fully oneself without artificial constraints or imposed limitations, creates a foundation for clearer decision-making in all aspects of life. Catherine seemed to appreciate the measured response. And the Eleanor Blackwood Opportunity Fund for Women in Publishing, was that part of this authentic vision? The scholarship program honors my grandmother's belief that diverse perspectives strengthen publishing as both a business and a cultural force, I explained, warming to a topic close to my heart. We've already awarded 15 scholarships to women from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in publishing leadership, with a particular focus on digital innovation and global markets. After Catherine departed, I remained in the conference room briefly, reflecting on how much had changed in the year since Nathan's betrayal had catalyzed my return to authentic living. The divorce had been finalized quickly, as William had predicted. Nathan had accepted the prenuptial terms without further challenge, likely recognizing that any protracted legal battle would only damage his position with federal prosecutors. His sentencing had come 3 months later, 4 years in a minimum security federal prison, substantially less than the maximum he might have faced without the plea agreement. The business press had covered the sentencing as the final chapter in a cautionary tale of ambition untethered from ethics, with Nathan positioned as an object lesson in the consequences of corporate malfeasance rather than a sympathetic figure. I had not attended the sentencing hearing, nor had I offered any public comment on the outcome. My only communication with Nathan since our confrontation at the Liberty had been through attorneys. The clean separation William had recommended, and I had embraced. Vanessa Collins had fared somewhat better, receiving probation rather than prison, time in exchange for her extensive cooperation against both Nathan and Summit Financial. According to Rachel's sources, she had relocated to Seattle and found work in an entirely different industry, her brief career in finance permanently derailed by her involvement in the espionage scheme. Victor Hargrove and Summit Financial had faced both criminal charges and civil penalties, with the SEC investigation eventually revealing a pattern of corporate espionage extending well beyond the Meridian situation. The resulting scandal had forced Summit into a fire sale of its assets to competitors, effectively ending its existence as an independent entity. Meridian Capital, meanwhile, had worked diligently to distance itself from Nathan's actions, implementing enhanced compliance protocols and ethics training that were pointedly mentioned in every public statement about the case. Walter Simmons had emerged relatively unscathed, positioning himself as instrumental in uncovering the espionage once suspicions were raised. The Blackwood Foundation had weathered the brief association with scandal surprisingly well, its long-established reputation for integrity and substantive work ultimately overshadowing any temporary connection to Nathan's crimes. If anything, my return to active leadership had accelerated the Foundation's evolution, with new initiatives in digital literacy and global education access gaining significant traction over the past year. On a personal level, the changes had been equally profound. I had sold the Beacon Hill house, unable to separate it from memories of my performative life as Emily Bennett. Instead, I now divided my time between a newly purchased penthouse in Cambridge, convenient to the publishing offices, and the Newport estate, which I had renovated to better reflect my personal aesthetic while honoring its historical significance. The protective compartmentalization that had characterized my marriage had dissolved completely. Friends, colleagues, and professional associates now interacted with the whole, authentic Emily Blackwood, rather than carefully edited versions tailored to specific contexts. The freedom this integration brought continued to surprise me. Even a year later, the simple pleasure of expressing opinions without internal censorship, of making decisions based solely on my own judgment rather than anticipating someone else's reaction. Emily? Marcus Daniels appeared at the conference room door, breaking into my reflections. The board is assembling for the quarterly review, and Rachel Chen called. She'll be joining us to present the updated legal structure for the international expansion. I gathered my materials, pushing thoughts of the past aside to focus on the business at hand. The quarterly board meeting would cover both publishing operations and foundation initiatives, with particular emphasis on our expanding global presence. As chairwoman, I would be guiding discussions on everything from digital rights management to grant distribution metrics, complex topics that demanded full attention. The boardroom, like the rest of the headquarters, had been redesigned to balance tradition with innovation. The massive mahogany table remained, but now it incorporated subtle technology, charging stations, integrated displays, and environmental controls that maintained perfect comfort without the distracting hum of visible equipment. Board members were already settling into their places as I entered, a mixture of long-serving Blackwood advisors like Walter Simmons and newer additions I had recruited over the past year to bring fresh perspectives, particularly in digital, media, and global markets. Rachel Chen was among the latter group, having joined the board 6 months ago while maintaining her role as outside counsel. Her legal expertise had proven invaluable during our international expansion, particularly in navigating the complex regulatory environments of emerging markets. Before we begin the formal agenda, I said once everyone was seated, I'd like to share some preliminary results from our digital literacy initiative in rural Southeast Asia. The pilot program launched 3 months ago has already reached 87% of its annual enrollment targets, with particularly strong participation from young women in communities where educational access has traditionally been gender-restricted. As I presented the early data, I noted the engaged interest across the boardroom, not the polite attention often granted to philanthropic reports, but the focused assessment typically reserved for core business strategies. This integration of purpose and profit had been central to my vision for Blackwood's evolution, eliminating the artificial separation between the publishing company's commercial activities and the Foundation's social mission. The meeting progressed efficiently through operational reviews, financial projections, and strategic initiatives. Throughout, I guided discussions with the balanced perspective that had become my leadership signature, respecting tradition while embracing innovation, acknowledging risks while encouraging bold thinking. Final item on today's agenda, I said as we neared the meeting's conclusion, the proposed acquisition of Lighthouse Digital Platforms. Rachel will present the legal and regulatory considerations, followed by Marcus on operational integration. The acquisition represented Blackwood's largest investment in digital infrastructure to date, a calculated move to vertically integrate our content creation with distribution capabilities that would reduce dependence on third-party platforms. The strategy ran counter to conventional publishing wisdom, which held that content creators should focus on their core competency rather than distribution technology. The due diligence confirms Lighthouse's proprietary technology offers significant competitive advantages, Rachel began, distributing detailed briefing materials. Their user interface consistently outperforms larger platforms in accessibility, metrics particularly for educational applications in developing markets. For the next 30 minutes, the board engaged in rigorous debate about the acquisition's merits and risks. I encouraged the skeptical questions, knowing that thorough examination now would strengthen implementation later if we proceeded. My grandmother had instilled this approach: never fear robust discussion before decisions, but once decided, move forward with unified purpose. Having considered all perspectives, I said as the discussion naturally concluded, I recommend proceeding with the acquisition as structured, with the additional compliance protocols Rachel has outlined. Those in favor? The vote was unanimously affirmative, a testament to both the proposal's solid foundation and the board's trust in my leadership. As the meeting adjourned and members gathered their materials, Walter Simmons approached me privately. That was impressively handled, he said quietly. Particularly the way you drew out the concerns about technology obsolescence risk, and then addressed them substantively rather than defensively. Your grandmother would have approved. Coming from Walter, who had known Eleanor Blackwood personally, this was meaningful praise. Thank you. She always said that the best decisions emerge from honest questions fearlessly addressed. Walter nodded, then hesitated slightly. I ran into your former husband's attorney at a bar association event last week. Apparently Bennett is teaching basic financial literacy to fellow inmates, making the best of his circumstances, I suppose. The information was offered neutrally, neither seeking reaction nor suggesting any particular response was expected. I appreciated Walter's straightforward approach, acknowledging Nathan's existence without treating the topic as either forbidden or significant. That seems constructive, I replied simply. I hope it's beneficial for all involved. Walter nodded again, understanding that my measured response closed the subject. As he departed with the other board members, Rachel remained behind, her expression suggesting she had noted the brief exchange. Still testing the waters, she observed once we were alone. Seeing if Nathan remains a sensitive topic. It's natural curiosity, I replied, gathering my notes from the meeting. And preferable to awkward avoidance or whispering behind my back. True. And you handled it perfectly. Acknowledging without engaging. Rachel paused, then added more gently. Does it still affect you? Hearing about him? The question deserved honest consideration. Did news of Nathan still trigger emotional responses a year after our separation? The brief mention of his prison activities had registered primarily as neutral information rather than painful reminder. Less and less, I admitted. It's like hearing about a character from a book I read long ago, recognizable but distant, no longer connected to my daily reality. Rachel smiled slightly. That's healthy, and probably more closure than most people achieve after a betrayal of that magnitude. We walked together toward my office, shifting conversation to the practical next steps following the board's approval of the Lighthouse acquisition. Rachel's legal team would coordinate with Lighthouse's representatives to finalize terms, while Marcus would begin planning the operational integration. My role would be strategic oversight and public messaging about the acquisition's alignment with Blackwood's broader vision. Later that afternoon, after Rachel had departed and the day's meetings had concluded, I found myself drawn to the small rooftop garden that had been part of the headquarters renovation. a peaceful space with carefully selected plantings and comfortable seating arranged to capture both sun and shade depending on preference. The garden had quickly become a favorite retreat for quiet reflection between meetings or at day's end. Now, as autumn sunlight bathed the space in golden warmth, I settled on a bench overlooking Cambridge's academic landscape, the historic spires of Harvard visible in the near distance. My phone vibrated with a text from William Porter. Judge, Warren has approved the final distribution of recovered offshore funds. Case officially closed from financial recovery perspective. This represented the final legal echo of Nathan's betrayal, the court-supervised process of recovering and redistributing the funds he had illegally obtained through his espionage activities. Most had been returned to Meridian Capital as the primary corporate victim, with a portion allocated to federal penalties and costs of investigation. The message brought a sense of completion rather than renewed anger or pain. The legal, financial, and emotional aspects of Nathan's betrayal had been methodically addressed and resolved over the past year, each closure another step toward the clean break William had advocated from the beginning. As I tucked the phone away, choosing not to respond immediately to William's message, I reflected on the anniversary that had arrived with remarkably little emotional weight. 1 year ago today, I had stared at my phone in disbelief, discovering the emptied account and Nathan's text about needing space with his colleague. The shock and anger of that moment seemed distant now, belonging to a different version of myself. The Emily who had spent 8 years deliberately diminishing her light to accommodate a husband's fragile ego and limited vision. That Emily felt like a character I had played in a long-running performance that had finally, mercifully concluded. The woman sitting in this garden, leading Blackwood Publishing and the Foundation with clear-eyed purpose, was the authentic Emily Blackwood. Not perfect or invulnerable, but whole and integrated, no longer compartmentalizing herself to fit someone else's expectations. My phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Marcus. Time magazine just confirmed the interview for their Innovators in Publishing issue. Their team will be here next Wednesday. Another opportunity to shape Blackwood's public narrative, focusing on our innovation and leadership rather than family drama or personal history. The Time feature would reach a global audience, positioning our digital literacy initiatives and publishing innovations in a broader context of educational access and content democratization. As I rose to leave the garden, Cambridge glowing in the late afternoon light beyond the rooftop's edge, I felt a surge of gratitude for the path that had led me here. Not just the privileged circumstances of my birth and education, but also the harder lessons learned through betrayal and recovery. Nathan had emptied our joint account believing he was leaving me with nothing. In doing so, he had inadvertently returned everything that mattered: my authentic identity, my clear purpose, my undivided focus on the legacy I was building rather than the role I was performing. The trust fund activation letter had indeed changed everything, but in ways neither of us could have anticipated that day. It had activated not just financial resources, but a return to wholeness that transcended monetary considerations entirely. Back in my office, I reviewed the schedule for the coming week: meetings with editors about promising new authors, strategy sessions for the Foundation's next phase of digital literacy expansion, preparation for the Time interview, and a site visit to the Eleanor Blackwood Scholarship Recipients Showcase at the Newport School of Design. Each appointment represented a facet of the integrated life I now lived, without the exhausting divisions that had characterized my marriage. No more separate phones, separate explanations, separate versions of myself carefully tailored to different audiences. Just Emily Blackwood, fully present and engaged in both professional leadership and personal authenticity. The emptied bank account that had triggered this transformation now seemed almost insignificant, a small price for the liberation it had ultimately provided. Nathan had taken $675,000 believing it represented my financial security. He couldn't have known he was actually releasing me from a constraint far more valuable than money. the self-imposed limitation of living beneath my capabilities to maintain a fundamentally unbalanced relationship. As evening approached and the headquarters gradually quieted, I completed a few final emails before gathering my things to leave. Tomorrow would bring the weekly Foundation leadership meeting, focused on expanding our digital literacy programs to additional regions in Southeast Asia and establishing new publishing scholarships for emerging markets. The town car was waiting. As I exited the building, Cambridge now bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. "The penthouse, Ms. Blackwood?" the driver asked as I settled in the back seat. "No," I decided, suddenly feeling the need for a different environment. "Newport, please." The driver nodded, adjusting our destination in the navigation system. The drive to the Rhode Island estate would take approximately 90 minutes at this hour, time I could use to review materials for tomorrow's meeting or simply to decompress after a full day of board discussions and strategic planning. I chose the latter, watching the Massachusetts landscape flow past as we headed south toward Rhode Island, the familiar journey becoming a transition between professional focus and personal reflection. This balance had become increasingly important over the past year. The recognition that even as I embraced my professional identity more fully, I still needed spaces and times reserved for purely personal renewal. The Newport estate had become that sanctuary, a place where Emily Blackwood could simply be, without the expectations or responsibilities that accompanied my public and professional roles. The renovation completed 6 months ago had transformed the historic property into a space that honored its heritage while reflecting my personal aesthetic and contemporary needs. Gone were the formal drawing rooms rarely used by modern inhabitants, replaced by comfortable gathering spaces with spectacular ocean views. The library remained largely untouched, its generations of collected volumes a tangible connection to family legacy, but now supplemented by state-of-the-art digital access to global archives and research resources. Most significantly, I had converted the East Wing into a combined living and working space that served as my personal retreat, a place where I could pursue interests and projects separate from both Blackwood Publishing and the Foundation, exploring ideas and possibilities without immediate connection to established institutional priorities. It was here that I had begun sketching plans for what might become my most personal contribution to the Blackwood legacy, a new imprint focusing specifically on women's voices in economics, finance, and organizational leadership. Not because these perspectives couldn't find homes in existing publishing channels, but because bringing them together under dedicated editorial vision might amplify their collective impact. The working title for this venture was simply Eleanor, a tribute to my grandmother's pioneering leadership in a male-dominated industry. The imprint would publish both traditional books and experimental digital formats, with particular emphasis on reaching young women in educational settings where exposure to female economic thinkers remained limited. As the car turned onto the private drive leading to the estate, Atlantic waves visible beyond the cliffs in the fading light, I felt the familiar sense of homecoming that Newport always provided. Not just the physical return to a beloved property, but the psychological return to the most authentic version of myself. The self that had emerged, paradoxically strengthened, from the collapse of my marriage. Mrs. Sullivan greeted me at the door, somehow anticipating my unscheduled arrival. "Welcome home, Ms. Blackwood. Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes if that suits your schedule." "Perfect, thank you." After a moment's consideration, I added, "I'll be dining in the morning room tonight." The morning room, with its eastern exposure ideal for breakfasts bathed in sunrise light, became something entirely different at dusk, an intimate space where subtle lighting transformed windows into mirrors reflecting the room's warm interior rather than the darkening landscape beyond. As I changed from business attire into more comfortable clothing, still elegant but less structured, I thought about the journey of the past year. The betrayal that had initially seemed devastating had ultimately proven liberating. The trust that had been broken had created space for new, more authentic connections, both professionally and personally. Even the public scrutiny that I had dreaded had eventually shifted from salacious interest in marital scandal to substantive engagement with Blackwood's business innovation and philanthropic impact. The narrative had evolved because I had taken control of it, not through manipulation or denial, but through consistent focus on meaningful work and authentic leadership. Dinner in the morning room was everything I needed after the intensity of the board meeting. Simple but exquisite food, peaceful surroundings, and blessed solitude in which to process the day's events and decisions. Mrs. Sullivan had understood my mood perfectly, providing service that was attentive without being intrusive, present when needed, but otherwise invisible. After dinner, I found myself drawn to the library, that repository of family history and accumulated wisdom. Unlike most rooms in the house, the library had undergone only minimal updates during the renovation. New lighting designed to protect the rare volumes while making them more accessible. Climate controls hidden discreetly to preserve the room's historical atmosphere, comfortable seating arranged to encourage extended reading sessions. The library had been my father's favorite room, and before him, my grandfather's. Now it was mine. A tangible connection to generations of Blackwoods who had built, sustained, and expanded the family legacy I now carried forward. I selected one of my grandmother Eleanor's journals from the special collection maintained on dedicated shelves, settling into the window seat that had been my favorite reading spot since childhood. This particular volume covered 1965-66, a pivotal period when she had established Blackwood's first female-led editorial division, challenging industry conventions about women's leadership capabilities. The resistance is both predictable and revealing, she had written after a particularly difficult board meeting. Men who consider themselves progressive in most matters become suddenly conservative when women's advancement threatens their presumed domain. Yet each barrier overcome creates space for those who follow. This is not merely a personal victory, but a transformation of what others can envision for themselves. Reading her words across the decades, I felt a profound connection to Eleanor's experience. The challenges she had faced as a female leader in publishing, the strategic patience she had cultivated, the legacy she had built not just for family benefit, but for broader social impact. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Lighthouse acquisition announcement drafted for your review. Also, Boston Magazine wants to include you in their Women Transforming Business feature next month. Thoughts? The simultaneity of reading. My grandmother's journal while receiving this message about contemporary recognition of women's leadership felt meaningful. A connection across generations of women navigating power and influence in evolving but still challenging contexts. Send the draft announcement, I replied. And yes to Boston Magazine, but with focus on publishing innovation rather than personal narrative. Setting the phone aside, I returned to Eleanor's journal, finding wisdom that remained remarkably relevant despite the decades that had passed since she had penned these reflections. Her insights on strategic leadership, authentic communication, and the delicate balance between tradition and innovation could have been written yesterday rather than over 50 years ago. As night settled fully over Newport, the library's warm lighting creating a cocoon of comfortable solitude, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment of integrated purpose and authentic leadership. Nathan's betrayal, emptying our joint account and fleeing with his mistress, had been the catalyst for reclaiming my true identity. The trust fund activation letter had been the mechanism for reasserting my financial and professional authority. But the deeper transformation had come from within. The decision to live as my whole, undivided self, rather than the carefully edited version I had presented during my marriage. The woman I had become over the past year was neither the diminished Emily Bennett nor simply a return to the pre-marriage Emily Blackwood. She was something new, tempered by betrayal but not defined by it, strengthened by adversity but not hardened against vulnerability, confident in her capabilities but aware, of the responsibilities that accompanied them. This integration of experiences, this wholeness of self, was the true change the trust fund activation letter had set in motion. Far more significant than the financial and legal protections it had triggered, valuable though those had been. As I closed Eleanor's journal and returned it carefully to its place on the shelf, I felt a sense of completion that had been building gradually over the past year. The circle that had begun with shock and betrayal had now closed with understanding and reclamation. The account Nathan had emptied had been refilled not just with financial recovery, but with the currency of authentic living and purposeful leadership. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the foundation meeting, preparation for the time interview, ongoing implementation of the Lighthouse acquisition strategy. But I would meet those challenges as the integrated Emily Blackwood, no longer compartmentalizing myself to accommodate others' limited perceptions or expectations. The trust fund activation letter had indeed changed everything, not by restoring what was taken, but by revealing what had been there all along: a woman of capability and purpose, temporarily diminished by choice but now fully reclaiming her power, her voice, and her authentic self. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.